TUROK. Book 3. Arena of Doom. By Michael Teitelbaum. For thousands of years the eldest male of the Saquon tribe protected the passageway between Earth and the lost land of Galiana. In time, this eldest became known as TUROK, Protector of Earth. The mantle of TUROK continues to be passed from one generation to the next in an unending battle to keep Earth from being destroyed. Prologue. The story so far. We find 17-year-old Joshua Fireseed trapped in the bizarre dimension known as the Lost Land of Galiana. Josh was accidentally transported to the Lost Land along with his 15-year-old tragically hip sister, Allison, and his wisecracking best friend, Barry Hackowitz, also 17. Millions of years ago, a Fireseed ancestor found the energy source responsible for opening the doorway between Earth and the horrible Lost Land. Since that time it has been the responsibility of the eldest Fireseed male to become TUROK, Protector of Earth. The mantle and burden of being a TUROK passed from one generation to the next in the Fireseed family. For thousands of years, TUROKs have defended Earth from attacks by the deadly evolved dinosaurs of Galiana, called dinosaurs. The last thing Joshua Fireseed wanted was for the burden of his family's responsibility to fall on his shoulders. But when his uncle Carl returned to Earth from Galiana on the brink of death, young Joshua inherited the job of protecting Earth as the new TUROK. Along with this responsibility, Josh also inherited the fringed leather satchel carried by all TUROKs, known as the Light Burden. The satchel gives TUROKs access to an almost infinite arsenal of weapons, magical objects, and powers. It was the power of the Light Burden that transported Josh, Barry, and Allison to the savage Lost Land. There, Josh was forced to learn the ways of a TUROK, using the weapons in the Light Burden. Arriving in the one protected place in Galiana, called the Safe Lands, Josh met Audon, the Speaker of Forever Light, who speaks for the Council of Voices, the ruling body of the Safe Lands. Here, Josh learned that an ancient being from another universe, known as Primogen, had awakened. The inhabitants of Galiana consider Primogen the greatest danger ever to threaten the Lost Land and Earth. Primogen awakened from his million-year slumber and planned to power up his light ship to attempt a journey home. Unfortunately, a side effect of Primogen's trip back to his own universe would be the total destruction of both Earth and the Lost Land. TUROK's mission to stop Primogen led him, Barry, Allison, and Audon to the arena of a creature known as the Campaigner. The Campaigner stages battles in his arena to weed out the weak. Josh defeated the mighty Campaigner, who plunged through a fold gate opening and landed in the holding pit below the arena, where the many beings he held prisoner tore him to pieces. His captain of the guard stepped forward to become the new Campaigner, but Josh easily defeated him as well. Using his wits, and some advice from TUROKs both past and future, Josh outwitted Primogen and saved Galiana and Earth. Amidst the victory celebration, however, came the sobering reminder that Josh, Barry, and Allison were still trapped in the deadly Lost Land with no way to return to their home in Oklahoma on Earth. Now Audon has returned to the Safe Lands to take care of the business of the Council of Voices. Josh now tries desperately to master Fold Gate travel, the way back to Earth, a way to take the three adventurers home. Chapter 1. Joshua Fireseed tumbled through the darkness. I can't control my travel through the Netherscape, he thought to himself for the 100th time since his ordeal with Primogen had ended. I can feel my body moving through the dark tunnels between the fold gate openings, and I can even glimpse places and times through the openings, but I can't maneuver my body quickly enough to choose the gate I want to go through. His frustration built as he felt himself falling. The same wave of dizziness that always came over him just before he was ejected from the Netherscape now brought a rush of nausea to his gut. He landed on solid ground with a thud. Josh sighed loudly. Same as the last 3 times, he said to his sister, Allison, and his best high school bud, Barry Hackowitz. Allison and Barry were relaxing beside a sparkling blue pond in a gorgeous green glen. The small remote paradise was one of the few peaceful places in the dangerous and hostile lost land of Galliana. I feel like I can almost control which fold gate to come through at will, but then I lose it and fall back through the netherscape, right back here, to the bad old lost land. No postcards from Earth yet, huh? Said Barry. Well, as I always say, if the server is busy, you have to keep reloading the web page. Remember, Rome wasn't built in a day. Now, Galliana, on the other hand. Josh turned to Allison with a lifted eyebrow. She returned the look and shook her head, agreeing with Josh that Barry was definitely out there. Josh flipped down the polished open lens that was attached to a red bandana that he wore around his forehead. The magical lens which sat on the bandana above his right eye and was known as the folding eye. It enabled him to see countless invisible spatial portals that were the mystical openings connecting Earth, Galliana, and other places and times in various universes and dimensions. The fold gate openings could also be used as travel devices, allowing Josh to disappear from one place and almost instantly reappear in another. But mastering the secret was the problem. Josh just couldn't unravel the tangled maze of what seemed like endless portals of various sizes and shapes. Sometimes he actually ended up in the place he had intended to go in Galliana. More often than not, he arrived at random destinations. That was why he kept trying to master his technique with the folding eye. I'm okay on traveling short distances from fold gate to fold gate, he said, surveying the area around him through the lens. When I was in the campaigner's arena and in Primogen's light ship, I popped out of sight and could reappear behind a fireborn or raptid, or whatever nasty thing I encountered. But traveling all the way from Galliana to Earth is like a singles hitter trying to swing for the fences. He looked down and shook his head. Well? Allison said, sitting up and stretching her arms. Get back to work. Time's a wasting. Practice makes perfect. See, I know some old cliches too. Do your disappearing thing, mighty Turok. You'll never be able to find the right opening that will take us back to Oklahoma by sitting around on your butt. Allison frowned. I'd like to get out of this sewer of the universe before I'm old enough to collect Social Security. Joshua gave Allison a dirty look. He was weary, and his nerves were on edge. He'd been practicing fold gate travel almost nonstop since his battle with Primogen. Although he loved his sister very much, they grew up together, raised by their older sister, abandoned by their parents. He wasn't in the mood for complaints at the moment. It isn't my fault we're trapped here, you know, he grumbled. Allison stuck her tongue out at her brother. It was a move she'd been doing since they were little kids, based as much on affection as contempt. Only in recent years, her tongue held a tiny silver stud in its tip. Hey! Josh replied, sticking out his tongue in response. I didn't ask to become Turok the Protector of Earth. The job was dumped in my lap. I want to get out of this dinosaur-infested alien catch basin as much as you do. He continued to glare at his sister. Barry nervously fidgeted with his glasses. He ran a skinny hand through his short, messy blonde hair, and then broke the tension-filled silence. As we Earthlings like to say, let's just chill, he suggested. Someday down the road we'll sit back and laugh about our many battles with hideous alien beings, bloodthirsty dinosaur human haters, merciless warmongers, and the other close friends we've made in this place. Barry forced himself to laugh. Think of the great stories we'll be able to tell our grandchildren. He gulped. If we live long enough to have any. Allison and Josh refocused their stares on Barry. Barry shrugged his bony shoulders. Okay. he muttered. There's no need to say anything. Just being good old Barry trying to lighten the mood, Hackowitz. That's my middle name, you know. It's on my birth certificate. Maybe you can pull that out of the light burden, Josh, so I can prove it. Josh's glare melted into a smile. Since the time they were kids together, Barry always knew how to get a laugh out of his best friend. As for Allison, she had seen the brave, assertive side of Barry during their adventures in the Lost Land. Although she would hesitate to tell him, she had gained a newfound respect for the witty scholar who had been friends with her brother for as long as she could remember. Josh spied a portal the size of a basketball backboard 2 feet above the water line of the pristine pond. I'm out of here again, he called, jumping up and racing toward the edge of the water. The Saquon warrior leaped high into the air as if to execute a perfect dive into the cool, icy blue water. Just before he hit the water's surface, his chiseled form soared into the portal and then vanished from sight without a trace. Now you see him, Barry said, and now you don't. I just hope he lands someplace soft. Allison grunted. She rolled over onto her stomach, her halter top revealing the striking red dragon tattoo that spread halfway across her shoulder and down her back. She'd cut her old tattered jeans into shorts, and the soft green grass felt good against her long, slender legs. I hope wherever he lands, it will give him a clue on how to get us out of here. A short distance away, near the area of Galliana known as the Safe Lands, laser cannons mounted on a massive transport vehicle swirled and fired blast after blast. The gigantic craft rolled perilously close to Galliana's only protected area. Zio! Zio! BLAM! Kaboom! The cannons blasted everything in sight. The Safe Lands were supposed to be a respected sanctuary from the brutal law of survival of the fittest, which ruled the rest of Galliana. The area was governed by reason and intellect rather than brute force. The Council of Voices, an elite group of ancient inhabitants, a human being, a dinosaur, and 2 different alien beings, were the ones in charge of the Safe Lands. Together they worked in harmony to establish peace and order in this chaotic dimension. The Council of Voices' 100,000-year-old bodies were stored in cryogenic stasis. Their minds were linked to one central computer that relayed their thoughts to their visual representative Adon, the speaker of Forever Light. Adon's senses were also linked to the central computer in the Safe Lands' Great Walled City. Adon appeared in holographic form and had the appearance of a human female, but she was mainly composed of bioelectric energy. Although she seemed around 18 years old, her computer program was over 500 years old. At this moment Adon was interfacing with the computer, receiving instructions from the council. The massive war wagon was crossing over into the area protected by the Council of Voices. Even though it was still miles away, Adon and the council not only knew its position but were also aware of its deadly intent. Who is it that dares to violate the sanctity of the Safe Lands, speaker? One council member asked Adon telepathically. I do not know, she replied with her mind. I intend to find out. But defense must be our first order of business. Agreed, the 4 members of the council thought in unison. Adon quickly organized a team of defenders to counter the unexpected invasion. In a matter of minutes, the great rumbling war tank was pinpointed, and a defense squad of skimmer crafts was on its way to confront the enemy. As the squad of fighters flew away from the Great Walled City, questions filled Adon's mind. Who dared to invade the Safe Lands? What was the purpose of the unprovoked attack? And last but not least, would the rescue force arrive in time to prevent bloodshed and devastation? WH, what's happening? Josh sputtered as he pinballed from portal to portal like a bouncing ball of human flesh. He careened from one opening to another, and caught shocking glimpses of strange worlds he never dared to imagine might exist. He saw a vast oceanic world where the dominant forms of life were advanced, shark-like beings who communicated with each other telepathically. Another world that he gazed upon briefly was populated by crawling alien beings who had huge, green heads attached to octopus-like tentacles. Still another doorway presented a view of a hellish world of fire and brimstone, where winged dragons lumbered about belching sparks and smoke. Other portals revealed places in Galliana he recognized from his recent travels during his mission to stop Primogen. Flashing before his eyes came images of the River of Souls, the Death Marshes, and the Acacian Mountain Range, all places where he had battled the fierce creatures of the Lost Land. It's like I'm in a room of mirrors and every exit is a false reflection of a place that exists somewhere else, Josh cried. How can we ever get home if I can't find my way out of this mind-boggling megamaze? Josh stumbled forward and fell headlong through a portal he thought was closed. Ah! He yelled as he plummeted through the slender warp seam between time and space. Where am I going to end up now? Some toxic swamp in another alien dimension? Boom! Boom! Kaboom! Back near the safe lands, the giant tank-like war wagon rumbled on while firing a deadly barrage of laser blasts. The immense vehicle was 200 yards long and 2 stories high. With all of its 20 guns blazing, the war tank slowly advanced on a small settlement in the jungle, not far from the gates of the walled city. The settlement was the village home of a band of fruit gatherers who had relocated their camp in the safe lands a short time ago, feeling certain of the sanctuary the area usually provided. The fruit gatherers were small, green-skinned aliens who had no techno-weapons at all. They fell victim to the shocking laser onslaught like stiff wheat to a harvester's sharp sickle. The tiny emerald aliens shrieked in alarm as they fled in stark terror. Run for your lives! The village elder urged his people. Run or be blasted to pieces. Zio! Boom! A cannon shot exploded a hut near the elder. The unlucky inhabitants were ripped apart and shredded into small chunks of broken bones and bloody flesh. A horrifying shower of debris and body parts soaked with green blood rained down on the elder and others nearby. K-blam! Another explosion at the opposite end of the village hit the group as they attempted to escape into the forest. Mangled bodies flew high into the air. Seconds later, mutilated corpses fell back to earth minus arms, legs, and heads. The elder stood frozen in shock. Transfixed by terror, he stared at the massive machine of death and destruction as it slowly advanced. It cannot be, he stammered to another survivor. I know that vehicle. It is the campaigner's slave pen. He uses it to collect weak specimens, his so-called fodder to be butchered by his warrior gladiators in the arena. The elder gasped. A cannon blast exploded another hut. No, he cried. This is the safe lands. Not even the dreaded and savage campaigner would dare to come here to capture victims. He shuddered. Besides, I thought the campaigner was dead. The new TUROK helped to destroy the Wicked One. I am certain of it. Whoosh! Josh emerged from the fold gate opening and was hurled back into Galliana within yards of where Allison and Barry were huddled together, cowering at the top of a tree. At the base of the tree stood a brutish, ape-like Perlin warrior known as a war club, who growled, shrieked, and beat the trunk with its fists. War clubs were not too bright, but they were extremely dangerous. Over here, pal! Josh called out to the war club, pulling a tranquilizer gun and tranquilizer dart from the light burden. Josh! Screamed Allison. It's about time you got back. Who told you to go into the netherscape, anyway? Cute, replied Josh, aiming the gun at the beast. This beauty surprised us a few minutes after you left, said Barry. You never saw Allison move so fast. Me! Shouted Allison. I didn't even know you knew how to climb a tree unless you could point at it and click it in a computer game. I'm a fast learner, quipped Barry, not content to allow Allison the last word. The war club spotted Josh. This ought to be easy enough, thought the young Turok. But before he could squeeze the trigger of his weapon, the beast was upon him, reaching Josh in 2 quick bounds, moving with far more speed than Josh ever expected. The war club knocked the gun from Josh's hands and landed with its full weight on Josh's chest. Only the mystical power of the Turok breastplate kept Josh's own breastbone from splitting in half. Josh tried to reach into the light burden for another weapon, but the weight of the creature's body pinned the satchel to Josh's side, sealing it shut. The war club closed its powerful hands around Josh's throat and squeezed. Barry and Allison saw that Josh was in trouble. The tree they had climbed was some type of mutated oak tree. Its acorns were as big as softballs. Josh needs our help, said Barry as he plucked a giant acorn from a nearby branch. Now coming in from the bullpen to relieve the great Turok, going for his first save, Barry Hackowitz, number 32. Barry reached back and threw the acorn with everything he had. The speeding projectile struck the war club squarely in the back of its head. The beast roared in pain and released its grip on Josh's windpipe. Josh used the momentary distraction to punch the war club right in the face. The stunned creature reeled backward. Gasping for breath from the chokehold he had just escaped, Josh shoved the beast with all his might. The war club's weight shifted enough for Josh to roll out from under, grab the tranquilizer gun that lay on the ground, and spin to his feet, firing. The slim tranquilizer dart found its target in the war club's shoulder. The piercing sting of the dart enraged the beast, who charged at Josh, teeth bared, growling. The Perlin mutant took 2 steps and was almost upon Josh, who could smell the war club's hot, putrid breath. Suddenly the creature collapsed in a heap from the effects of the tranquilizer dart. How's your throat? Allison asked as she and Barry scrambled down from the tree to join Josh. A bit sore, but I'll live, Turok replied, rubbing his neck. Nice throw, bud, he added to Barry. Thanks for the save. How come you never tried out for the Central High baseball team? Well, you know, began Barry modestly. I didn't want to show you up. I mean, how would it be if I had the brains, the looks, and the athletic ability? Josh smiled. So what do we do with Gruesome here? We don't want to be around when he wakes up from his little nap. Why not chuck him into one of your fold gate openings and make him someone else's problem? Suggested Allison, shrugging her shoulders. Not a bad idea, replied Josh. Give me a hand here. Josh flipped down the folding eye and spotted a nearby portal. With Barry and Allison's help to support the tremendous weight of the ape-like brute, Josh guided his unconscious opponent into the fold gate, where he disappeared into the netherscape. I just hope I don't run into him the next time I'm in the netherscape, said Josh. Now that you mention it, said Allison, I'm not so sure I'm thrilled with the idea of you leaving us alone again. I thought the Perlin rarely leave the death marshes, said Josh. Or the campaigners' arena. That guy must have gotten really lost. I think you guys should be all right while I'm surfing the netherscape, but just in case. Josh reached into the light burden and pulled out Turok's heavy plasma pistol. Ah, my trusty pistol, said Barry, who had once carried the weapon during an early encounter with giant cave spiders during their time in the Lost Land. "As I recall," said Allison, "you dropped your trusty pistol at the first sign of trouble." She reached over and grabbed the weapon out of Barry's hand. Details, replied Barry, pointing at the weapon. "I feel a lot better having that little puppy around while Turok's away." "Calm down, Rambo," said Josh. "With any luck, you won't have to use it." Barry and Allison went back to what they had been doing before they were so rudely interrupted by the war club. For Allison, that meant swimming in the crystal-clear pond. For Barry, it meant amassing interesting specimens for his insect collection. Barry was pursuing a 10-legged purple beetle when suddenly a swarm of giant mosquitoes the size of hornets began to buzz above his head. He swatted at them with his hand and chased them away. "I should have remembered to bring some insect repellent with me from Earth," Barry complained. "Mosquitoes just love me. I'm a walking Hackowitz cocktail. Bring your own straw." At that instant, a giant cockroach the length of a yardstick scooted out from under a fern and dashed past Barry. It ran right over the front of his sneakers as if he wasn't even there. Allison swam up to the edge of the pond. "Maybe we should have also brought along a bag of breadcrumbs like Hansel and Gretel," she mocked. "We could have dropped the crumbs on our way to Galliana. Then, all we'd have to do is follow the crumbs through the right portal that leads to home." "Ha! Ha!" scoffed Josh. "Now that's a crummy solution to a serious problem." "Ooh," moaned Barry. "I thought I was the keeper of the bad jokes around here." "You are," said Allison bluntly, as she dove back toward the center of the pond. "Galliana is an entomologist's dreamland," Barry said to Josh, ignoring Allison's comment. "Look." He opened the cloth sack he had been using to hold his specimens. It was filled with a bizarre assortment of dead insects. All of them were 2 or 3 times the size of bugs back on Earth. "Gross," Josh said. "What do you plan to do with those?" "I'm going to dissect them later," Barry disclosed gingerly. "Galliana is filled with fascinating forms of life. These species are unique, to say the least. Look at this." He stuck his hand into the sack and sifted through the pile of lifeless insects. "Check it out," he said, extracting the body of a firefly the size of a light bulb. The bug was dead. Nevertheless, it continued to blink on and off. The rear portion of the insect glowed a bright blue color. Barry looked at Josh. "I've collected a bunch of these fireflies. Aren't they amazing?" he asked. "Yeah, fascinating," grunted Josh sarcastically. He didn't even pretend to be interested, he just turned and walked away. "Thanks for your interest," Barry replied with equal sarcasm. "Sorry, bud," said Josh. "It's just that this portal thing is getting me down. It's like striking out with the bases loaded twice in the same game. The big hitter is supposed to deliver under pressure, and I keep falling short of the mark." Back on Earth, Josh was a Division I college prospect on his high school baseball team. He often compared his life experiences to game experiences. Barry patted Josh on the shoulder. "Hang in there, slugger," Barry said. "Like Yogi Berra said, it ain't over till it's over. You'll get another turn at bat." Chapter 2. The campaigners' massive death machine ground to a halt in the center of the fruit gatherers' village. Doors slid open in the belly of the great craft, and ramps were lowered. Troops of apish Perlin soldiers gushed out of the machine brandishing weapons above their heads. The Perlin warriors, a more intelligent class of Perlin than the war club that Josh and his friends had encountered, rushed into the village, herding their submissive captives back toward their vehicle. In only a matter of minutes, the entire fruit-gathering tribe had been captured. When the Safe Lands Rescue Force arrived at the fruit-gatherers' village, there appeared to be no enemy in sight. The 6 skimmer crafts hovered above the empty village searching for signs of life. All they saw were smoking huts and the twisted, mangled bodies of the dead. Suddenly, without warning, the camouflaged war vehicle rolled out of its hiding place in the dense foliage surrounding the village. Immediately, its battery of lasers opened fire. Before they could take evasive action, 3 skimmer crafts were shot down, plummeting to the ground in flames. One of the 3 remaining ships was blasted apart in midair. The ship and its crew were instantly incinerated in a giant ball of flames. Another ship was hit and forced to make an emergency landing. It spiraled to the ground, leaving a swirling trail of smoke behind in the sky. The lone remaining ship had no choice but to turn tail and retreat. It flew off to its home base within the Great Walled City. The war machine's lasers ceased firing. Perlin warriors stormed out of the craft to collect the survivors for arena fodder. When the prisoners were secured, the great attack vehicle rumbled off, following the vapor trail of the last surviving skimmer ship. The campaigners' next target was the huge, walled city of the Safe Lands. Back in the glen, Barry put his hand on Josh's shoulder. "Ready for another trip into the great beyond, pal?" he asked. Josh had been sitting by himself, thinking about all that had happened to him since he had arrived in the Lost Land. He also thought about how badly he wanted to get home. "Hey, big brother Turok, clobber of the campaigner, pummeler of Primogen," said Allison, her joking tone unable to completely hide her pride. "How about the portal that leads us back to Earth? Let's not forget the task at hand, shall we? I'd like to see the rest of my family again, not to mention my friends." "Knowing all your friends, I wouldn't mention them either," quipped Barry. Allison stuck her studded tongue out at him. The color suddenly drained out of Josh's face. His chin dropped solemnly to his chest. His chest heaved as he sighed loudly and threw up his arms in frustration. "I can't do it. I can't get us home. I've flunked Fold Gate Opening 101. He spun around and sat cross-legged on the ground. Then he took the light burden off his shoulder and tossed it aside disdainfully. Allison knew her brother well enough to know when he was genuinely upset. He often covered his hurt with bravado and jokes, but since this whole Turok business had begun, she had witnessed true frustration on her brother's face. "The game is over, team," Josh blurted out. "The cleanup batter whiffed again. I can't figure it out. We're going to be stuck here forever." Allison sat down next to Josh and put an arm around his shoulder. "Oh no, we're not," she said softly. She reached over and snatched the light burden off the ground, handing it to her disgruntled brother, who reslung it over his head. "Remember when you had trouble learning to turn a double play back on Earth?" she reminded Josh. "What did the coach tell you?" She paused. "He told you to practice. And you did. Over and over again you practiced. You finally got it. Now you're the best high school second baseman in Oklahoma." Allison took a deep breath. She looked her brother square in the eyes. "You can do this," she assured him. "All it's going to take, big brother, is practice." "So practice." Josh shook his head. He lowered the folding eye as he stood. Then he spotted a fold gate opening near his sister. Josh leaped right at her. Allison screamed and ducked. Josh sailed directly over her head and disappeared into the portal. Instantly, he vanished from view. "Maybe this time he'll discover the right doorway," Barry said to Allison. Her head nodded in hopeful anticipation. Just then, Barry and Allison heard a loud splash. Barry grabbed his sack of bugs. He and Allison rushed back to the pond. They found Josh floating out in the middle of the pond, treading water. Josh spit out a stream of water in the direction of his friends. "Wrong portal again," he explained. Allison didn't answer. She just hardened the features of her face as she stared at him. "Lighten up, Ollie," Josh said. "I get the message. Practice. Practice. Practice." When the campaigners' war craft reached the walled city of the Safe Lands, Audon and her troopers were on the walls, armed and waiting. Audon's thick braid of long, blonde hair fell down her back past her waist. Her brown bodysuit contained built-in circuitry, gold epaulets, and two large forearm plates that served as her direct connection to the Council of Voices. The city's last skimmer ship patrolled the skies above. Audon was about to order the laser cannons on the walls to open fire on the war tank when a disturbing sight came into focus. Captives in small bamboo cages were secured to the rolling war machine in strategic places where the attack craft was most vulnerable to damage. Alien fruit gatherers, including the Elder, were caged near the vehicle's many gun batteries. The surviving safe land pilots of the crashed skimmer crafts were in cages dangling precariously above the tank's control center. Other captives were locked up and displayed in the same manner on the sides and rear of the vehicle. "Hold all cannon fire," Audon ordered. "We cannot shoot without risking the lives of innocent victims." Audon's eyes blazed. She turned to the alien troop commander, who was beside her on the wall. He was an 8-foot-tall soldier with 4 muscular arms and a canine head. "Open the front gate, Major Grok, and lead your rangers out of the city. Attack the underside of the vehicle with photon bazookas. If we're lucky, you may be able to disable it and force its occupants to surrender." The order was no sooner received than the campaigners' war wrecker opened fire. BLAM! BLAM! Kaboom! Laser cannon fire exploded everywhere as Major Grok raced off to carry out Audon's command. Casualties on the wall were heavy. Defenders of the Great Walled City were blasted to pieces. Soon, bodies piled up on the ramparts as the savage non-stop bombardment continued. Audon ordered the city's last skimmer ship into action. The craft's pilots bravely dove out of the sky, attempting to draw the devastating fire away from the city walls. At the same time, the walled city's main gates opened and Major Grok and his troop of canine rangers rushed out into the fray. The safe land troops split into several attack units. Each unit was equipped with a 2-man photon bazooka team. Major Grok's team was the first to open fire. Whiz it! K-blam! A photon rocket was launched up at the vulnerable underbelly of the huge tank. It exploded and shook the vehicle but did not penetrate the tank's rigid outer hull. Another bazooka team fired a rocket. Whiz it! K-blam! It dented the hull. Suddenly a door in the craft slid open. A ramp was lowered, and out poured a stream of enraged Perlin soldiers. The Perlin were guided by the Perlin headsman, who was even larger and more fierce than the troops he commanded. The headsman rushed madly toward Major Grok, wielding a huge razor-sharp cleaver in his right hand. Major Grok drew his laser pistol. He took aim and fired. The laser beam sizzled and crackled as it burned a hole clear through the headsman's hairy chest. Before Major Grok could find a new target, a Perlin gunner cut him down with a lethal rock-firing Gatling gun. Dozens of jagged projectiles struck the Major in the face and head, tearing deep gashes in his flesh. Blood gushed from the fatal wounds and he fell, never to rise again. The brutal and deadly contest raged on with either side letting up. The body count soared as torrents of many-colored life fluids soaked into the battle-scarred ground. Then, finally, the war tank ceased firing. All guns fell silent. On the ground, the hand-to-hand combat stopped. A secret hatch in the war vehicle's control center opened, and a shocking and bizarre form emerged from the bowels of the mechanical monster. The creature that came out to address the defenders of the Great Walled City seemed only part human. It had a human form, arms, and legs, but attached to its face, chest, and back was a type of parasite. It was a large, hideous insect. The parasitic bug and its host formed a bizarre symbiotic relationship. The bug lived on its host's human blood, which it used, then returned to the host's body, while the insect's huge impenetrable shell provided its host with nearly invulnerable front and back armor. "What do you want?" Audon shouted to the leader of the attacking forces from her perch on the wall. The dreadful-looking thing roared out its response. "Tell the Council of Voices I want the new TUROK. Give him to me." Audon was a bit confused by the thing's answer. "Who are you?" she questioned. The Council of Voices was guiding her tongue. The thing on the war machine laughed loudly. Then it proudly announced, "I am the campaigner." Audon's eyes glowed as her puzzlement grew. "The campaigner is dead," she replied. "He was defeated by the TUROK known as Joshua Fireseed. The campaigner's own captives tore him to pieces." "I know. I witnessed this myself." Again the half-man, half-creature laughed. "That was the old campaigner. At that time I was his captain. I have ascended to his position of power. Now I am the campaigner." Then he pointed at Audon in a menacing way. "I asked you again, speaker, where is the TUROK? Give him over if you want the attack to end." Audon did not reply immediately. After a thoughtful pause, the speaker of Forever Light responded. "The TUROK is not here." "Where is the TUROK?" asked the hideous campaigner. "I cannot and will not betray him," Audon stated. The campaigner laughed in a mocking fashion. He turned and made a signal with his arm. 100 captives selected for arena fodder were marched out of the belly of the war tank led by Perlin warriors. The prisoners were huddled up as Audon and the safe land guards watched in horror. The campaigner signaled a second commander. The tank's main laser battery was aimed at the helpless crowd of captives. "Tell me where the TUROK is," the campaigner demanded, "or they all die." Audon was silent. "The Council of Voices must decide the fate of the TUROK," she said emotionlessly. There was a tense pause. The campaigner's patience quickly wore thin. "Fire!" he commanded. "No!" Audon cried. "Zio!" The laser blast erupted from the barrel of the weapon. Instantly, Audon used a bioelectric charge to deflect the beam and save the prisoners. The bioelectric charge flashed through the air and disrupted the laser blast, but it also severely weakened Audon. In all probability, she did not have the power to deflect a second shot. "The Council has decided to grant your request," Audon began. "Under the following conditions." "I'm listening," the campaigner called out. "You must release all prisoners with you at this time and allow them to enter the safety and sanctuary of the walled city of the Safe Lands," Audon stated. "You will also give your word never to cross into the Safe Lands again." "I agree," the campaigner said. As vile and merciless as the campaigner could be, he had a strict code of ethics. Once his word was given, he never betrayed it. The campaigner waved to his guards. The prisoners were set free. Other guards began to empty the prisoner cages attached to the outer hull of the war tank. "Now," the campaigner shouted, "live up to your end of the deal. Tell me where the Turok called Joshua Fireseed is." Adon began to speak. The words were not her own. It was the Council of Voices who betrayed Joshua Fireseed to save the lives of hundreds of innocent victims. Speaking through Adon, the council told the campaigner exactly what he wanted to know. Chapter 3. "Do you think Josh will find the right portal on this trip?" Barry asked Allison as they lounged on the grass beside the pond. Josh had been gone for longer than his previous attempts to find the fold gate that would take them home. Allison shrugged. "Who knows?" she said. "Here in Galliana, I wouldn't be surprised at anything. All I do know is that the more attempts Josh makes, the better the odds are of finding the right portal." Barry stood up. He picked up his bug bag. "I'm going to collect a few more of these insect specimens while he's gone," Barry stated. "Our hours in the Lost Land may be numbered." "Right," replied Allison. "And you wouldn't want to risk missing even one disgusting crawling bug before we leave." Before Barry could respond with a clever quip, a loud, frightening noise echoed out of the distant undergrowth. Crunch! Rumble! Rumble! At the first sound, Allison jumped to her feet in alarm. She stared off in the direction of the noise. The rumbling grew louder and louder. They heard tree trunks being snapped and splintered. The nerve-wracking grinding sound twisted the tense twosome's intestines into nervous knots. What is that?" Allison gasped. Barry shuddered and gulped. If it's a bug, it's a mighty big one," he muttered. "I don't think it will fit into my bag." He swallowed hard. Barry glanced at his bug sack. "I just hope we don't end up in its specimen bag." Crunch. Smash. Rumble. "Whatever it is," replied Allison anxiously, "it's coming this way." She glanced at Barry. "Maybe we should run for it." Barry shook his head. "Suppose Josh comes back," he replied. "He won't know what happened to us. Let's hide. Maybe the thing is just a big, harmless butterfly." He grinned sheepishly. "Oh yeah, right," Allison remarked. "And war clubs might fly out of my butt. Come on. Let's go hide." The two friends rushed off into the underbrush. Meanwhile, Joshua Fireseed was once again bouncing from portal to portal in the puzzling interdimensional netherscape. Concentrating with all his might, Turok was able to slow his uncontrolled flight to a minor extent. Little by little, he found himself capable of guiding his movements toward the portals of his choice. The strain was mind-bending, but slowly he gained control of his direction. Josh was about to propel himself toward a portal he hoped would lead back to Earth when a strange impulse tugged at his will and began to erode his rigid concentration. As he was pulled away from his portal destination, he caught sight of some disturbing images. Turok spied the Native American Saquon Reservation in Oklahoma, where he and Allison lived with their older married sister, Vivian. He saw Vivian's house. Outside of the house was Henry Jakashawa, Viv's husband. Henry was playing catch with his 8-year-old son, Clay, who was next in line to become Turok after Joshua. "Clay! Henry! Viv!" Josh yelled. He stretched out his hand, trying to get through the portal to reach his loved ones back on Earth. Josh's hand closed on empty air as he was sucked backward into a swirling vortex he couldn't escape from. He was violently yanked into a portal leading back to Galliana, the Lost Land. A dazed and bewildered Joshua Fireseed was deposited feet first in a clump of bushes near the pond where Allison had been swimming. He fell to the ground and lay face down in a semi-conscious state. "I saw them," he mumbled. "I saw Vivian, Henry, and Clay," he cried. "It was Earth," he declared. "I found the right portal, but I couldn't reach it. Something pulled me back. I couldn't reach it, but I saw them. This is further than I've ever gotten." Josh gathered himself and got to his knees. He wiped his face with his hands and took a deep breath. "Did you hear me, Allison?" he yelled as he dropped his hands. "I saw Earth. I saw our house." Josh looked around. The pond and the surrounding glen were both deserted. "Allison?" he shouted. "Barry?" His head turned left, then right as he scanned the immediate underbrush. Behind him a portion of the jungle was ripped apart. Trees were snapped, and the ground was chewed up. Josh sprang to his feet and rushed over to investigate. The first thing he spotted was his heavy pistol, lying on the ground. "I wish Barry would learn how to keep hold of this thing," he thought, slipping the weapon back into the light burden. Then he saw the tracks of a monstrous tank of some kind. He also saw signs of what looked like a fierce struggle. Josh saw a wisp of cloth. He bent over and picked it up. He immediately recognized it as a piece of Barry's tattered t-shirt. Josh continued to search the area. He found a small pile of dead bugs. He knew they must have spilled out from Barry's specimen sack. Lastly, he happened on a clue that sent shivers of alarm up his spine. It was a huge cleaver, the type favored for use in combat by a Perlin headsman. "Perlin troopers," Josh grunted. He gritted his teeth angrily. "They took Allison and Barry! How could I have been so stupid as to leave them alone again in this place?" The War Club attack was a warning, a sign. I was fooled by the natural beauty of this spot. How could I have been so stupid? He repeated. Josh tried to use what he had learned in his time as Turok. He took a deep breath and focused his thoughts. He studied the trail made by the apparently huge vehicle that had torn through the glen and taken his sister and best friend. The trail led off into the deep jungle. Well, they've left an easy trail to follow, he thought. At least there's that. His eyes narrowed to slits. I'll find them, he vowed out loud. And for the sake of the Perlin, they'd both better be in really good health when I do. Josh's face contorted with rage. He plunged his hand deep into the light burden hanging at his side and pulled out his tech bow and a quiver of tech arrows from his mystic Turok arsenal. He raised the deadly weapon above his head. If anything happens to Allison or Barry, the Perlin will rue the day they ever came face to face with this Turok, he said to himself, wanting the whole of the lost land to hear. He patted his chest with his left hand, which caused his mystic breastplate to quiver. The wooden rawhide ornament made its wearer impervious to most types of physical harm. It was one of two pieces of mystical clothing that Josh had received when he inherited the mantle of Turok. The other was the leather chaps he wore on his legs, which gave him the speed of a puma. If they touched so much as a hair, he couldn't even finish the thought. Clutching the tech bow in his right hand, he dashed off, following the vehicle's trail into the jungle, racing along at the magically enhanced speed of a jungle cat. Turok relentlessly dogged the trail of Allison's and Barry's abductors for most of the day. As evening approached, he was dismayed to find that the tracks led into a dank and dismal swamp. He halted at the edge of the murky water and gazed out upon the wide expanse of shallow, green slime. How could a tank that size have driven through that without getting stuck? He wondered, shaking his head. To cross that swamp, they would need some sort of hovercraft. Josh quickly began to search for any signs of tracks elsewhere. He didn't find any. The vehicle hadn't doubled back or skirted around the swamp. It was obvious that the tank had somehow driven through the watery region. Apparently, this tank can switch to hover mode when it needs to, he thought. Great for them, bad news for me. Turok shook his head in despair. It looked like his trail had come to a bitter and unexpected end. There was no way he could follow his abductors through the massive swamp. There were no tracks. There was nothing to follow. Josh searched his brain for an answer to his dilemma. Nothing in the mystical light burden could help him now. Light? Muttered Josh as the shadows of dusk slowly closed in. Josh squinted and stared closely at the swamp. He spied a faint blue light floating a short distance from the shore. Josh raced forward and plunged feet first into the knee-deep water. He splashed over to the source of the light. Looking down, he saw that it was a dead Galliana lightning bug, the kind Barry had been collecting in his sack. Josh scooped up the glowing, dead bug in his hand. A few feet away, he spotted another one. He smiled. It looks like Hansel and Gretel have left a trail for Turok to follow, after all, he said in relief. He dropped the bug and started off across the eerie swamp. An hour later, night had already dropped its black curtain and shrouded the swamp in darkness. A bright, full moon filled the sky and landscape with dim yellow light. There's another bug, Josh said to himself as he sloshed toward the glimmering lifeless firefly floating on the surface of the murky water. Josh bent over to pluck the glowing bug out of the scummy water. He was so intent on following Barry's trail of glowing crumbs, he didn't notice that he, too, was being followed. Slithering along behind him was a slimy swamp serpent that stretched 25 feet from snout to tail. Its scaly body was as thick as a medium-sized tree trunk, and its head was larger than a manhole cover. When Josh halted, so did the poisonous snake. The monster opened its jaws, exposing two razor-sharp fangs that protruded like curved daggers. The creature hissed loudly and prepared to strike at its unsuspecting prey. The sound of the snake's hiss alerted Turok to the danger behind him. As Josh pivoted to find the source of the sound, the snake's jaws clamped down, catching the strap of the light burden. The poison-filled fangs just narrowly missed nicking his flesh as he turned. Turok now spun on his heels and hurriedly fit a tech arrow to the string of his tech bow. Hunter and hunted came face to face as the deadly serpent reared up and lifted its head high out of the water, yanking the light burden from Josh's shoulder. The serpent towered above Turok. Josh took aim and fired as the snake began another attack, its poison-filled fangs flashing in the bright moonlight. The tech arrow pierced the monster's lower jaw and continued through its upper snout. The energy-charged arrow exploded in a devastating plasma burst upon contact. The head of the snake blew apart. Bloody pieces of flesh, skull, and bits of brain rained down into the swamp. The headless snake's body twisted violently as the tail lashed at the water. The twitching tail knocked Josh off his feet as the snake fell into the swamp, quivering and shaking. Death slowly claimed its lower regions. Josh lifted himself up from the green, brackish muck and waded over to the dead monster's head. He cautiously removed the light burden from its shattered skull, being careful not to touch the deadly fangs around which the bag's strap was draped. Slinging the bag back over his shoulder, Josh continued on his quest to rescue Allison and Barry. He swore not to rest until he caught up with the vehicle that held his sister and friend captive. On and on he went, trudging through what seemed like endless miles of swamp. All through the night Josh followed the trail of glowing bugs. By dawn of the next day the weary Turok stumbled out of the swamp and onto dry land. He came out of the murky water within a few feet of where the vehicle's tracks once again appeared. "I have to rest," he admitted to himself. "Even Turok needs sleep." Josh fell to the dry ground between the tracks left by the mysterious vehicle. His eyelids fluttered and then closed. For 2 hours he slept. Turok awoke with a jolt as the sun inched higher in the sky, rising toward its midday zenith. Quickly he got to his feet. "I'll have to make up for lost time," he told himself. "I'll also need to be better armed." Once again Josh reached into the fringed satchel. This time he pulled out one of his most useful and powerful weapons, the Turok auto shotgun. Josh cocked the gun. He held it at arm's length and jogged off in pursuit of the vehicle. Once again moving as swiftly as a puma, he covered mile after mile, making up the time he'd lost sleeping. As he raced forward, the surrounding terrain began to look familiar to him. The landscape changed from dense foliage to barren, lifeless rock. "I know this place," Turok grunted as he continued on. "And now I know where this vehicle is headed," he scowled. "I'm moving right toward the campaigner's arena," Josh muttered as he quickened his pace. "This doesn't make sense. This makes absolutely no sense at all. The campaigner is dead. I know, I was responsible for his death." Chapter 4. Late that afternoon, Turok was within sight of the great stone stadium that served as the campaigner's gladiatorial arena. The huge battle tank he trailed from the pond was parked near the rear wall of the tall stadium. Josh took cover behind a huge boulder and studied the situation. A dozen or so Perlin soldiers were milling around near the tank. Just beyond, at the arena's main gates, stood 2 huge Cyclops guards. The guards towered 7.5 feet tall and both had massive, well-muscled, orange-skinned bodies. Each of their hairless heads had one large eye in the center of the forehead. They were armed with laser spears, the tips of which glowed with a powerful light that could slice through anything they came in contact with. Josh slumped down behind the large rock. The new campaigner certainly didn't waste any time taking over where his predecessor left off. "He seems to be a tougher customer than I gave him credit for when I beat him so easily," he thought. "I need a plan." Allison and Barry are probably being held inside the arena's dungeon. That's where the campaigner keeps his captives. Josh's face contorted in anger. The thought of his sister and his friend in the terrible fodder pit, as the dungeon was known, enraged him. The pit was cold, dark, and disgusting. It was filled with lice, fleas, and other foul blood-sucking parasites. A sudden roar erupted from the arena. Josh turned and glanced in the direction of the main gates. He heard loud cheers and jeers echoing out of the stone stadium. It sounded like the place was packed with the usual assortment of Galliana lowlife and lost land aristocrats slumming at the expense of some poor captive. Some people seemed to think the combination of hors d'oeuvres and gore made for a big night out on the town in Galliana. Josh scowled. The campaigner's arena was where the rich and famous came to rub elbows with local hunters and mercenaries to enjoy the thrill of watching blood sports. Another loud cheer came from the stadium, followed by hoots and howls of laughter. "They love to see blood spilled," Josh grumbled. "As long as it's not their own." He stared at the main gates, sizing up the guards. "I think I can take out those guards at the gate if I can distract the Perlin near the tank," Josh decided. He reached into the light burden and focused his concentration intensely. He pulled out a grenade launcher. "This should keep the Perlin near the tank out of my hair," he said as he loaded the launcher. Again, he reached into the fringed satchel. This time he extracted the tranquilizer gun and darts that had dispatched the war club at the pond. "And this should take care of the gate guards," Turok said. "No need to kill anybody if I don't have to." Josh had seen more than enough death since his arrival in the Lost Land. Josh stepped out from behind the rock with the weapons in his hands. "It's time to rock and roll," he thought. He broke into a run and headed toward the tank. Because the ruckus from the stadium kept them temporarily distracted, the Cyclops guards and the Perlin warriors didn't notice his approach. When the war tank was well within range, Josh halted. He put down the tranquilizer gun and then raised the grenade launcher. He aimed right at the battle wagon's control center window. Slowly, he squeezed the trigger. BLAM. Zoom. Kaboom! The grenade hit the control center window and smashed right through it. Inside the tank, the grenade detonated. The Great War wagon burst into flames from the inside. The Perlin on the ground below yelled in terror and ran in alarm. BLAM! BLAM! Josh fired again and again. Kaboom! Kaboom! Grenades exploded on the top and side of the battle vehicle, and the tank began to burn on all sides. The dim-witted Perlin huddled beneath the blazing war wagon yelling, pointing, and hollering at each other. Time to move on, Turok told himself. Returning the grenade launcher to the light burden, he snatched the tranquilizer gun and bolted toward the main gates. The guards were now aware of the presence of an intruder. They lowered their laser spears and charged to greet their attacker. Josh leveled the tranquilizer gun at one guard and fired on the run. Sing! The speeding tranquilizer dart hit the huge orange alien in the throat. He dropped his weapon and grabbed at his neck with both hands. He whirled on his heels like a top, then dropped to the ground, kicking spasmodically for an instant. Then he slumped into a motionless state. Josh turned and fired at the other giant Cyclops. The one-eyed, orange guard ducked, and the dart whizzed over his head. Before Josh could fire again, the guard was upon him. The Cyclops lunged forward with his spear. Its laser tip sliced the tranquilizer gun in half, rendering it useless. "Now you will die, intruder!" The guard grunted. He poked his laser spear at Josh's midsection. Josh leaped to the side and dove to the ground. He rolled over toward the tranquilized guard, grabbed his laser spear, and sprang to his feet. The two combatants were now armed with the same weapons. The Cyclops jabbed at Josh, who blocked the thrust. The guard lunged. Josh sidestepped the point of the spear and sliced downward with his own weapon. Its laser point sliced through the metal shaft of his enemy's spear, cutting it in two. The guard was left with a useless piece of metal pole in his hand. Quickly, Josh turned his spear around. Clutching it near the laser point, he swung the metal shaft like a baseball bat, whacking the Cyclops in the side of his head. Bonk! The blow landed with such force that the guard was knocked cold. Home run, fireseed, thought Josh as the guard crumpled to the ground just as a thunderous roar erupted from the stadium. Josh looked up at the arena's main gates. He raced to the huge wooden doors. Placing his muscular shoulder against the thick wood, he pushed with all of his might. He heard the crowd roar again. Then shouts and laughter filled the air. The heavy door swung open, giving Josh a view of the arena's central battle zone. He froze in stupefied awe. A battle to the death was going on before his eyes in front of thousands of appreciative onlookers in the stands. Out in the battle zone, a terrified Barry Hackowitz was running for his life. In his hand was a short, three-pronged electrified spear. Chasing Barry was an alien centaur. The half-bug, half-horse creature was colored blue and black. On its horse-like body there rested an insect head. Large eyes and antennae protruded out of its skull. In its hands was a short, razor-sharp sword and a round shield. "Help!" Barry screamed as he zigzagged around the arena. "Somebody help me! Please! Help!" The spectators in the stands roared in glee at the horrific sight. They cheered and laughed, urging on the centaur as Barry began to run out of steam. Josh watched in shock as Barry stumbled and fell. The trident tumbled out of his hands. The centaur moved toward Barry and raised its sword for the kill. "Kill him!" Someone in the stands bellowed. "Chop the fodder into pieces," another fan called. A chant rose from the crowd. "Live to kill! Kill to live!" The chant grew louder and louder as the centaur closed in on Barry. "Live to kill! Kill to live!" Josh recognized the chant as the motto of the campaigner, and the rule that governed the arena. "No!" Josh screamed, racing out into the arena with the speed of a puma. He dashed at the centaur and jumped feet first at the creature before it could strike the fatal blow on Barry's neck. Whump! Josh smashed into the centaur's ribs, breaking two of them, and knocking the creature off balance. The half-bug, half-horse staggered backward and fell over sideways. Its sword and shield went flying. The centaur hit the ground and rolled onto its back with its hooves kicking in the air. "Nice timing, bud," said Barry, tossing his trident up to Josh. "Another minute and my head would have been a wall decoration in the campaigner's rec room." "Where's Allison?" Josh asked as he caught the trident. "Don't know," replied Barry. "We got separated as soon as they brought us into this place." Josh turned and stood over the downed centaur. He held his weapon with the prongs pointed at the beast's chest. The crowd gasped. A hush of dead silence fell over the crowd as everyone waited to see what would happen next. Josh thrust his arm forward, sticking the trident into the ground near the defenseless creature's body. Josh turned toward his pal as the centaur struggled to get to its feet. Josh helped Barry up. "I disappear for a while and the next thing I know you're horsing around with this guy in the campaigner's arena," Josh joked. The two friends smiled. An uneasy murmur began to sweep through the crowd of spectators. The murmur turned into a rumble of discontent. Soon, the crowd began to jeer and hoot. "Live to kill! Kill to live!" The chant began again. "Silence!" boomed a voice that filled the arena. The crowd instantly heeded the command. All heads turned to the stone throne, which sat above the arena's battlefield. On the throne sat the campaigner. He slowly stood to his enormous 9-foot height. The campaigner looked like a patchwork out of a nightmare. Shredded pieces of clothing draped in tatters over his huge body. Flags of different worlds hung from his back. On his face, neck, chest, and back sat the insect that served as his living armor. All the campaigner's blood flowed through the insect, then back into his own face. Josh looked up. "Let me guess," he muttered to Barry. "The new campaigner?" Barry swallowed hard. "Yep. Apparently he's quite the sadist. Kind of a demented game show host, if you asked me. And I think that you're probably the next item up for bid." The campaigner bellowed in a rage. "I said silence and that order includes you, TUROK," he snarled. The massive battlemaster glowered above Josh and Barry. "I'm glad you've come back for a visit, TUROK," he continued. "I'll be sure to give you a warm welcome, momentarily, complete with repayment for the humiliation you inflicted upon me on the day you killed my predecessor. But right now there is a competition going on in my arena, which you have so rudely interrupted. The campaigner put his hands on his hips as guards began to filter into the arena through various passageways. Step out of the way, Turok, and let the battle continue. Your wait will be a short one. The fodder you call Barry should be dispatched by his foe in a minute or two. The centaur trotted over and picked up its sword and shield. It walked uneasily, due to the ribs Josh had broken. Anger glared in its insect eyes. It approached Barry and Josh. Stop! Josh warned the centaur as he spun on his heels to face the campaigner. He knew there was no chance of fighting his way to freedom. Limited firepower would be no match for the hundreds of heavily armed guards. And if he brought out the truly big guns, he could wreck the place, but many innocent people would die as well. There was only one alternative to watching his friend's untimely demise. Let me take Barry's place, Josh called out. I'll fight the centaur. The campaigner threw back his head and roared in laughter. Following his cue, the spectators packed in the arena howled in glee. When the campaigner stopped chuckling, the arena became silent again. The campaigner then thrust an arm in Josh's direction, pointing a menacing finger at him. No. You can take the centaur's place and do battle against Barry, he shouted. What do you say to that, Turok? Never, Josh flatly refused. He glanced at his pal. Barry is my friend. I'd never fight him, not even to save my own life. Josh's answer enraged the campaigner even more. There are no friends in the arena, he bellowed. There is only victory or death. Unlike you, campaigner, Josh yelled back. I am loyal to my friends. Ha! Scoffed the new ruler of the arena. There is no such thing as loyalty in the Lost Land. You came to Galliana with 2 companions. Besides them, who else in the Lost Land would you consider a loyal friend? The campaigner's words sank into Josh's brain. After a second's hesitation, he answered the question. Adon, he said. The speaker for the Council of Voices. Adon knows the meaning of friendship and loyalty. Josh paused. Adon is a loyal friend. A faint snicker escaped from the campaigner's mouth. It grew into a loud, mocking guffaw. The sound of his loud laughter rocked the arena and disturbed Joshua. He didn't understand what was so funny. Your loyal friend Adon is the one who told me where I could find you and the other 2, the campaigner shouted between laughs. She sold you out to save the lives of insignificant fodder. Thanks to Adon, I was able to capture your friend and your sister. Thanks to her, I found the bait I needed to lead you right into a trap. Now Turok, you are my prisoner. The arena guards began to close in. A guard took the centaur's sword and shield. Then a Perlin soldier picked up Barry's trident and handed it to him. Fight, the campaigner ordered Barry and Josh. Barry gulped. He and Josh circled each other slowly. You will fight! Screamed the campaigner. Barry made a half-hearted stab at Josh with the trident. What are we supposed to do now, bud? He asked. Let's give them a little show, replied Josh. See if we can buy some time. Josh whipped his sword in a circular motion and knocked the trident out of Barry's hand. It flew up toward the campaigner. He had to duck to avoid being hit by it. That was a little too good of a show, said Barry. Now what? Josh threw down his sword and shield. I told your predecessor, and now I'll tell you. I will not kill. Now let us go and tell me where my sister is. he demanded. If you won't fight, the campaigner replied, step aside. Josh stood his ground. Step aside, Turok, the campaigner hollered. Stand back and bear witness to the execution of your so-called friend. The campaigner pulled a long dagger out of a sheath dangling from his belt. Clutching the gleaming blade in his hand, he leaped down into the arena. I personally cut the throats of the cowards who refused to fight for the amusement of my guests. He gestured to the packed house. The crowd roared and clapped in appreciation. The campaigner raised the knife and started for Barry. The guards had their weapons squarely aimed at Josh. If he made a move to fight the campaigner, both he and Barry would be killed, and there would be no chance of saving Allison. Leave him be, Josh said. Spare him and I'll give you anything you want. The campaigner halted. Always one with a shrewd eye for a deal, he thoughtfully looked Josh over. He pointed at the light burden, a symbol of Turok power. Will you willingly give that to me? He asked. Josh looked at the fringed satchel dangling from his shoulder. He ripped it off. Take it, he called as he threw the satchel at the campaigner's feet. It means nothing compared to the life of my friend. The campaigner put his dagger back into its sheath. He bent over and picked up the light burden. You are not even worth fighting, he said to Josh. No Turok gives up his weapons for the life of such a worthless creature. He looked at Barry contemptuously. The campaigner turned back to Josh. You are no Turok. You are fodder. You are not worthy enough to be called the protector of Earth. He reached out and pulled the folding eye off Josh's forehead, then tossed it into the light burden. You won't escape using this either. Then he pulled off Turok's mystic breastplate and chaps. They instantly vanished into the fringed leather satchel as well. He gestured for his guards to close in. You must be taught courage, valor, and bravery. I will put you in the pit with the rest of Galliana's worthless fodder. There you will learn the rules of the arena. He looked up at the crowd. Well, he roared after a few seconds of silence. The chant began again. Kill to live. Live to kill. The campaigner's guards grabbed Josh and Barry and quickly dragged them away. Farewell, fodder, the campaigner scoffed. The pit awaits you. Join the other useless, spineless worms. The pit, Barry moaned as he was pulled toward a dark passage in the side of the arena wall. I don't suppose there's any room in the penthouse. Josh struggled to free his arms and legs. It was useless. 6 burly guards had hold of him and dragged him down a dark, musty hall deep in the bowels of the arena. At the end of the hall, 2 short, stubby turnkeys with faces and snouts like pigs moved toward a large stone slab on the floor. The slab had a rope attached to a ring at one end. The other end of the rope was run through a pulley high above. The loose end of the rope dangled down to the floor. The muscular pig guards grabbed the rope and pulled. Slowly, the slab in the floor rose at one end. Cries of anguish and wails of despair echoed up from the pit below, along with a rancid, foul stench, the stench of rotten food, unwashed bodies, and the waste of countless species, the stench of hopelessness. When the slab was lifted high enough, the entrance to the fodder dungeon was revealed. Barry and Josh were forced to the edge of the opening. There was a 10-foot drop into the dungeon below. Barry and Josh saw the crowds of helpless humans and aliens packed together like rats in a sewer. Before either could utter a sound, they were pushed through the hole and plunged into the dungeon below. They crashed onto the cold stone floor and looked up in panic as the slab was quickly lowered, sealing them in the horrible pit from which no one had ever escaped. Chapter 5. Allison Fireseed's isolation cell was also deep in the bowels of the arena, in a hallway opposite the dreaded fodder pit. The isolation cells were used as holding pens for captives whose feisty spirits attracted the attention of the campaigner or Captain Cree, his second in command. Cree was in charge of training members of the campaigner's elite guard. It was the job of the elite guard to fight in the arena for the amusement of the campaigner. Only the bravest and toughest warriors got to join the elite guard, and something about Allison told Cree that maybe the young woman had what it took. In his mind, she was certainly more than simple fodder. Cree himself was a rhinoid from the planet Rhinothorpe. He stood 7 feet tall and had thick, gray skin like that of an earth rhinoceros. Growing out of his low forehead was a sharp, ivory horn, which he could skillfully use in combat. Cree had risen through the ranks from gladiator to elite guard to sergeant-at-arms, and finally to captain of the campaigner's guard. As captain, he was next in line to become the campaigner should any disaster befall his new master. Following his unsatisfactory confrontation with Turok, the campaigner went to see Cree. He found his second in command in the hall leading to the isolation cell. "What is your opinion, Cree, of the Earth Girl, Allison Fireseed, the Turok's sister?" the campaigner asked the captain. Cree stuck his huge thumbs in the wide belt he wore. Dangling from the belt were a curved sword and a laser blaster. "The girl fought like a hellcat at the pond when we took her," Cree said. "Later she punched a Cyclops guard in the eye when we arrived at the arena. He still can't see straight. She spit in the face of a gladiator and kicked one of my elite guards in a spot that made his voice rise 2 octaves and then made him black out. I think she might make a fine guard." The campaigner nodded in agreement. "From what I've seen and heard, she has more courage than her brother, the Turok." He chuckled. "It would suit me to have the sister of a Turok fight for my pleasure." He looked at Cree. "See to her training personally." The rhinoid captain smartly saluted his commander. "Consider it done," he replied. The campaigner turned and walked away. Cree smiled in a sinister way. "I will see to it that the girl becomes a trusted member of the guard," he vowed. Then the captain started off toward the isolation area. Minutes later, the door to Allison's prison cell slowly opened. She was sitting on straw that was clustered in a bunch on the stone floor. There was no furniture in the cell. It was barren. Allison got to her feet as Captain Cree walked in. A pig guard turnkey stood by at the door. "What do you want, Hornhead?" Allison asked. "You'll be sorry when my brother Turok, gets here." "And what did you do with my friend Barry?" Captain Cree shook his huge, hairless gray head from side to side. The motion made his large ears flap. "I have bad news, little girl," he said matter-of-factly. "My name is Allison, and I'm a woman," she replied. "Where I come from, guys who call me little girl get kicked right in the—" "Silence!" barked Cree. "You Earthers have an annoying habit of babbling endlessly about nothing." "Yeah, well, I'm sorry my conversation doesn't suit you," snapped Allison. "Maybe female hornheads don't talk much, but where I come from—" "I am not interested in what it is like where you come from," replied the captain. "You are here, and here is where you will stay." "So, what's this bad news you're talking about anyway?" asked Allison. "Unfortunately, your companion Barry has been dispatched in the arena by a centaur warrior," Cree explained. "Dispatched?" muttered Allison. "What do you mean, dispatched?" Cree shrugged his massive shoulders. "Dispatched," he repeated. "Do you prefer destroyed? Or maybe killed? Is that clear enough, little girl?" Cree watched closely to see how Allison would react to his lie. At first her face registered shock. Then her expression changed to one of sorrow. Tears trickled out of the corners of her eyes. And finally, her facial muscles contorted as anger flushed into her cheeks. "You butcher!" she yelled. Balling her right hand into a fist, she punched Cree right on the chin. His head snapped back, but his huge flat feet stayed glued to the spot where he was standing. Allison jumped back and threw another punch. Again, her fist rocked his chin. When she attempted to throw a third punch, he reached out and grabbed her fist in his huge hand, squeezing hard. Allison cringed. The pain rushed up her arm and into her shoulder. "And my brother Josh will make you pay for this," she grunted. "He's the TUROK. When he gets here you'll pay dearly for what you did to Barry." Cree smiled. "TUROK is no longer in Galiana," Cree said, spinning another lie, testing his potential trainee. "He has returned to Earth. He left you behind. Now you are all alone." The color drained out of Allison's face. Cree pushed her away and released his powerful grip on her hand. She crumbled to the floor. "Josh went back to Earth?" She stammered in disbelief. "And no, it's not possible. Barry is gone and Josh left me here alone. No." She got to her feet. "You're lying," she accused. "Josh and I have been through. You have no idea, you lying hornhead." Cree shook his head. "What purpose would it serve for me to lie to you, Allison?" He spoke her name purposely. "I am here to help you survive in Galiana. I like your spirit. I want to train you to be a member of the campaigner's elite guard. As a member of the guard you would enjoy many special privileges." He paused. "If you are wise you will make the best of a bad situation." Allison pondered Cree's words. She didn't trust the huge, menacing captain, but what choice did she have? Becoming a member of the elite guard might prove useful if she really was stranded alone in the brutal Lost Land. It might also give her a chance to avenge Barry's death and find Josh if he really hadn't gone back to Earth. Later on, if things went right, she might be able to escape to the safe lands. "Okay," Allison agreed after some deliberation. "I'll do it." "Good," Captain Cree replied. "Your combat training will begin first thing tomorrow morning." He turned and lumbered out of the cell. The turnkey slammed the prison doors shut and locked it. Once again, Allison was left alone in her cell. She slumped down on the straw. Sadly, she shook her head. "Poor Barry," she said softly. Tears flowed from her eyes. "Why?" she said as she fought the urge to cry hysterically. She wiped her face on her arm. "Why did Josh leave me here? Why did this whole thing happen to us?" She leaned her weary head back against the stone wall and shut her eyes. Sleep came quickly. The next day Allison was up before dawn, fed a good meal, and then outfitted with new clothes. She was also issued a short dagger and a laser spear. "When you have demonstrated undying loyalty, you will be issued more sophisticated weapons like a blaster and a laser rifle," Captain Cree told her. Allison accepted her primitive weapons without comment. She followed Cree as he led her down a long hallway to an outer training area. The training area was inside a stockade with high wooden walls, which formed a large rectangular battle area. Waiting for Allison in the center of the battle area was Barrow, the Cyclops guard she'd punched and almost blinded. Barrow was also armed with a laser spear. Cree and Allison entered the battle area. As soon as he saw Allison, Barrow assumed a fighting stance. "Now your training begins," Captain Cree told the young Saquon girl. "Kill or be killed. That is the lesson you must learn to become an elite guard." He stepped behind Allison, put his hand on her back, and shoved her toward Barrow. Cree pushed Allison so forcefully that she fell to the sawdust-covered ground. Her spear fell from her hand. Instantly, Barrow charged his defenseless foe. Allison saw him coming. Barrow raised his laser spear to stab at the Earth girl. Quickly, Allison rolled to her right as the searing laser point brushed past her side, tearing the sleeve of her shirt. She rolled again and sprang to her feet. "Take advantage of a helpless girl, will you?" she yelled as she recovered her spear from the ground. Allison gritted her teeth. "Orange guys with only one eye shouldn't fool with pointy objects," she warned. Her temper was now hot. Her blood boiled with hatred for the Cyclops, for Cree, for the campaigner, for this whole damned adventure. Rage, rather than fear, drove her. "You never know what might poke your eye out." Allison lunged at Barrow with her laser spear. Barrow dodged the thrust and countered by turning and striking a blow with the blunt end of his long spear. The shaft hit Allison behind her knees and took out her legs from under her. She fell hard and landed on her back. Captain Cree laughed out loud. The other members of the elite guard who were watching the combat session also laughed. The sound of the laughter caused Allison to grow even angrier. Her eyes flashed as she grabbed her spear and scrambled to her feet. Using the blunt end like a pole, she vaulted feet first toward Barrow. The surprise move caught the huge, orange Cyclops off guard. Allison's feet crashed into his chest and knocked him off balance. His spear went flying. He landed on his back, sprawled on the ground, weaponless. Moving with flashing quickness, Allison drew the dagger she'd been issued, which hung in a sheath at her side. She jumped on the Cyclops and placed the blade against his throat. "I yield," Barrow screamed as he pleaded for his life. "I yield. Please spare me." Allison glanced up at Captain Cree. "Kill or be killed, isn't that what you said?" she asked. "Hold!" yelled Cree. "Members of the elite guard kill only in the arena at the command of our leader, the campaigner. Put your dagger back in its sheath." Allison glared at the Cyclops and then at Captain Cree. Calmly she put away her dagger. The other guard applauded. Cree went up to Allison. "Congratulations," he said. "You have passed the first test. An elite guard always fights well and always obeys orders." Allison looked at the captain and nodded. She was biding her time. Allison Fireseed didn't take orders from anyone. 2 weeks of intense physical training followed. Allison was instructed in how to use a blaster, a laser rifle, and an assault bazooka. She learned how to fight with a sword, a trident, and a spear, and was taught lethal hand-to-hand combat techniques. Captain Cree personally monitored her progress. Allison seemed to have a real knack for combat. Cree was impressed. "You learn fast, Earth Girl," Cree told Allison after another day of training came to a close. "You obey orders and you fight well. In a matter of weeks, you've mastered skills and techniques it's taken other recruits months to learn." "That's because I'm not stupid like most of the beings I've met in Galliana," Allison replied to her instructor. She failed to mention that by concentrating on her physical training, it kept her from thinking about Barry or Josh. All she thought about was getting out of there. Allison walked into the huge mess hall with Captain Cree, where members of the elite guard were served their meals. She continued their conversation. If I'm going to be stranded in the Lost Land, I might as well make myself as comfortable as possible. She stopped at the line forming in front of the service area. Members of the elite guard are well fed, she said. And we have decent living quarters. Cree nodded. I take it your new room is a great improvement over your former cell. My room isn't the Ritz, but it's better than the pit, Allison replied. Cree's eyes narrowed to slits. What do you know of the pit? He questioned. The captain now wondered if Allison had any idea that her brother and friend were adrift in the ocean of lost souls confined in the arena's dark underworld. I've heard the other guards speak of the pit, Allison said. I know the arena fodder is kept there. That's what I know. That is all you need to know, Cree answered. Now go get yourself a tray and some food. Cree pointed into the service area, which looked to Allison like a high school cafeteria. As Allison went into the serving area, the campaigner strode into the mess hall. He was wearing Turok's light burden slung over his shoulder. Captain Cree immediately went up to greet his commander. How is the Earth Girl's training coming? The campaigner asked his captain. I believe she is ready to fight to the death in the arena as a member of the elite guard, Cree replied. In such a short time? The campaigner said in an astonished tone. The captain nodded. She is ready, he assured his commander. I have arranged a little demonstration to prove my point. Cree looked across the mess hall. He raised an arm and signaled to a burly Perlin warrior waiting near the food service area. Allison came out of the service area carrying her tray of food. On a cue from Cree, the Perlin walked up to her and blocked her path. Allison stopped dead in her tracks. The Perlin reached out with a thick, hairy arm and punched upward under her tray. Food flew everywhere. The tray, eating utensils, and her dinner showered down, littering the mess hall floor. For an instant, the dining room was silent. Then the room burst into thunderous laughter. The giant Perlin looked down at the small Earth girl before him and smirked. The beast was daring her to retaliate. Instead of losing her cool, Allison just smiled back at the ape-like beast and nodded. The hairy Hulk grinned and looked away for an instant, basking in the approval of the guards. That was when Allison made her move. She leaped up and punched the huge creature in the throat. The blow momentarily caused his throat to contract. The brute gasped for breath. As it choked, Allison leaned back and kicked the Perlin in the midsection. The beast doubled over. Its great arms dangled as it heaved and wheezed. Allison grabbed its right arm and spun on her heels. She ducked under the arm and twisted. The Perlin jerked into the air involuntarily. The beast's body flew up, then came down hard on a dining table. Bam! Scraps of food, glasses, and plates were mashed beneath the bulk of the subdued Perlin. The mess hall roared in appreciative laughter. Next time, Allison shouted to the dazed Perlin. Wait your turn. Bravo, girl, the campaigner said. He clapped his hands as he strolled forward with Captain Cree at his side. The captain is right. You are ready to uphold the creed of the campaigner's elite guard. Allison turned toward the campaigner. She was about to speak when something caught her eye and stole the very words off her tongue. Dangling at the campaigner's side was a familiar fringed satchel. It was Turok's light burden. Allison glanced at the bag. How could the campaigner have the light burden if Josh has gone back to Earth? She wondered. Even if he did finally find the right fold gate, Turok would never leave without his mystic bag. Do you wish to fight for the glory of the elite guard? The campaigner asked Allison. It would be my honor, Allison lied. She couldn't keep her eyes off of the light burden. Confusing questions started to buzz within her brain. Had Cree lied when he told her that Turok had left Galliana? Was her brother Josh really back on Earth, or was he still here? Was Barry dead, or was that also a lie? Allison looked away from the bag. The questions that plagued her needed to be answered. But she also knew that she had to continue to play her role of a loyal recruit if she was to learn any more. "Nothing would please me more than to serve as a member of the Great Campaigner's elite guard," she said. "I'm getting good at lying," she thought. A necessary talent in Galliana. "I told you she had the spirit," Cree said to the campaigner. "Now she also has the skills." The campaigner nodded in agreement. "So be it," he stated. Arrange for her first appearance in the arena. The campaigner turned to walk out of the dining hall. Allison watched him leave. Her eyes were glued to the light burden swaying at his side. "Where is he?" Allison wondered. "Where is my brother?" Chapter 6. Galliana was filled with many horrible places. The fodder pit of the campaigner's arena was by far the worst of all. The pit was down in the arena's deepest level, like a tomb for the living dead. It was the size of several football fields. The walls and floor were constructed of cold, hard, damp stone. The only light to penetrate the huge dim area filtered in between the cracks of the entrance slab and the arena's ceiling. Joshua Fireseed and Barry Hackowitz sat in the shadows of the fodder pit, hunched up against the damp stone wall. Josh's thumb and forefinger were stuck in the snug enslavement collar wrapped around his neck. Each captive, fodder to the campaigner's games, wore such a collar. This solid metal ring was permanently fastened around the neck and contained a chip that linked it to the elite guard's main computer. Every prisoner was easily tracked through the collar. But it also served another, more sinister purpose. By pressing a controlled device on his belt, a guard could send a severe shock through the collar, causing prisoners excruciating pain. The shock was so intense, it rendered even the most violent or aggressive captive helpless and immobile. Josh tugged at the collar to test its strength. "There's no way to snap it off or even bend it," Barry sighed. "The metal ring is seamless. It has no weak points. You couldn't even slice through it with a laser." Barry reached up and touched his own collar, then sighed. "There must be some way to get this blasted thing off," Josh said, groaning. He pulled and tugged at the collar. He spun it around and around his neck. "If I only had the light burden." "I've been meaning to talk to you about that," said Barry. "Not the best move you ever made, giving the bag to the campaigner." "Well, what was I supposed to do, let them kill you?" Josh said defensively. I know, said Barry. "I'm just wishing it was here, that's all. The first thing I'd pull out is a 4-course dinner. I've never been this hungry. We've been in here for 2 weeks and I can count on one hand the meals we've had." Food, when and if the fodder was fed, was tossed into the pit through that overhead entrance. The slab was raised, and buckets of slop were poured down into the darkness. The slop that was dropped in every 2 or 3 days was a mess of bones, scraps, vegetable bits, and moldy bread. Mostly it was garbage left over from the guards' dining hall. Whenever food was poured in, the starving masses in the pit fought like starved animals for every scrap. Josh looked around and took in the bleak picture before him once again. He spotted an alien with a human body, a long, slender neck, and a serpentine head. His long, forked tongue whipped in and out of his mouth. The alien's name was Hispath. He was a Viperin, who had long ago lost his fangs. Next to his path sat a skinny, green alien with tentacle-like arms. His name was Demak. Near Demak, a short being named Petro huddled in a corner. Petro stood 4 feet high. His skin was bright red, and his spiked hair was purple. Petro had 3 eyes that ran across his forehead. Demak, Petro, and his path had been captives in the pit for a long time. They were the only prisoners who'd made contact with Josh and Barry. Demak had been kind enough to show them where they could get a drink of water. Petro helped them get food. Hispath, an elderly scholar, led them to a small space where they could rest quietly. Most of the other occupants in the pit were members of what on Earth would be called gangs, groups of like aliens who bonded together in a desperate attempt to survive. Rival gangs fought for food, water, and space. Suddenly, the entrance slab began to rise. Whenever the entrance opened, it meant one of 2 things. Either more prisoners were being dumped in, or else it was feeding time. Hoping that the latter was true, captives hurriedly began to cluster below the huge opening. They raised their arms as light streamed down from above. One prisoner started a chant that was quickly picked up by the others. Food, food, food! Give us food! A frail-looking fruit gatherer begged. Please! We're starving, pleaded Petro. Food! Cried Demak. Food! Shut your filthy mouths! The pig turnkey commanded. He reached for an electronic device on his belt. His stubby finger pressed a red button on the device. Bizzed! The fruit gatherer screamed in pain and grabbed at his enslavement collar with his hands. He fell to the floor, twitching wildly. Bizzed! Bizzed! Demak grabbed his neck and fell over. His large yellow eyes rolled back in his head. His long arms flapped on the ground like fish out of water while his face contorted in anguish. Back away from the hole, you miserable fodder rats, the turnkey ordered. The crowd of starving captives, fearful of punishment, began to slink away. They realized now they were not going to be fed. Let the fodder known as Joshua Fireseed come forward, the turnkey shouted. A visitor wishes to see him. Upon hearing his name, Josh quickly got to his feet. He exchanged puzzled looks with Barry. Go, Barry urged. Maybe you're going to be released. That, hissed Hispath, is highly unlikely. Josh sifted his way through the throng of prisoners until he was directly below the pit's entrance. I am Joshua Fireseed, he said flatly. The turnkey looked down at Josh. You are honored with the visit of Barrow, a member of the elite guard, the turnkey stated, then stepped back. A cyclops like the 2 he battled at the main gate stepped up to the hole and peered down at Josh. So this is the former hero whose sister now serves the campaigner, Barrow shouted. He laughed in a mocking fashion. I plan to kill you in the arena to get revenge against your sister for what she did to me. He shook his head. But I can see you are hardly worth the effort, he scoffed. And my sister? Josh hollered. What did you say about Allison? Where is she? Tell me. Josh gritted his teeth and angrily waved his fist in the air. Barrow glanced at the turnkey. The turnkey nodded. He reached down and pressed the red button. A jolt of intense pain shot through Josh's body. The shock knocked him off his feet. He fell to the ground twitching in agony. Barrow laughed and waved other turnkeys forward. In their thick hands they held buckets of slop. They poured the disgusting mess into the hole. The scraps and leftovers splattered over Josh's sprawled body. Food! Cried the mass of prisoners as they stampeded forward to battle for scraps and bones. Help me, Hispath! Barry begged. He rushed over and began to pull his dazed friend out of the path of the other prisoners, who stooped and licked the slop off Josh's body and off the floor next to him. Hispath and Barry finally pulled Josh to safety. The effect of the shock will wear off shortly, Hispath told Barry. Do not worry. Joshua Fireseed, the Turok, will recover. Barry studied Hispath closely. Neither Barry nor Josh had made mention of Josh's Turok lineage. So you know who he is? Barry said. Hispath nodded. I am a Viperan sage, he replied. I know many things. Then he turned to join the mad scramble for food. Josh lay in a semi-conscious state at his friend's side, engulfed in darkness. Through the blackness, he heard a soft voice calling out his name. The voice was no louder than a whisper, and it sounded very far away. It was that soothing voice repeating his name over and over that helped revive him. Josh's eyelids snapped open. He jolted into a sitting position. Who is calling me? He yelled. He looked around and saw Barry behind him. Were you calling out my name? He asked his friend. Barry shook his head. I haven't said a word, he replied. Josh looked from side to side. He saw the other captives fighting viciously for bits and pieces of food. The mysterious voice he'd heard in his head soon slipped his mind. Above him the entrance slab slammed shut, closing out the light. The riot over the food continued in the blackness. Not far from Josh, two members of an alien gang known as Barfs teamed up and jumped a member of a rival gang, grabbing for his food. The first Barf pinned his much smaller adversary to the ground, and the second demanded the small piece of rancid meat the creature had been gnawing on. That's mine! Shouted the second Barf, picking up a piece of broken glass from the ground. I had it first, countered the trembling alien. Without hesitation, the Barf raked the jagged piece of glass across the throat of the smaller alien, slitting his gullet open. Brown blood spurted from the gaping wound as the creature uttered a gurgling sound, then fell forever silent. Now whose meat is it? Cackled the murderous Barf, greedily gobbling the moldy gristle. His fellow Barf gang member reached for some, but the thief threatened his own partner with the jagged glass. It was his, Josh replied to the Barf's question, pointing at the slain creature. Killing him doesn't make it yours. Interfere. You too shall die, screamed the Barf. He and his fellow gang member charged at Josh, who readied himself for combat and focused his mind on the task at hand. Josh sidestepped the Barf with the weapon, grabbing his shoulders and smashing the creature's ankles with his foot. Josh pulled on the Barf's shoulders, using his own weight against him. The murderer went flying toward a group of insect fodder who were busy eating and clicking their way through a conversation. The insecticide alien scattered, and the Barf crashed into the wall. The second Barf faced Josh. He swung a large blue fist at the Turok. Josh squatted down as the Barf's arm passed over his head. Josh then rammed his head into the creature's midsection and drove him into the far wall, his legs pumping furiously. Josh turned around and found the first Barf only inches from his face, his glass shards slashing. Josh leaned back to avoid getting cut, then placed his hands on the Barf's head and vaulted over the alien. Grabbing his adversary in a chokehold from behind, Josh squeezed the killer's windpipe until he passed out. Turok tossed the limp body aside in time to see the second Barf crawling away from the fray. He had had enough. And so had Josh. All around him, fighting continued. Stop it! Josh hollered as he caught his breath. An elbow from a nearby fight whacked him in the side of the head, knocking him back down. Stop fighting! He screamed at the top of his lungs. You're letting the campaigner turn you into mindless beasts. Stop fighting and listen to me. Strangely enough, the battle for food suddenly stopped. It could have been that the power of Turok, even without the light burden, channeled through Josh's voice and commanded attention in this moment of mass mayhem. Or it simply could have been that all of the scraps of food had been eaten already, and there was no more point in fighting. Whatever the reason, the huddled mass of captives stood and stared at the young, dark-haired Saquon warrior. Why fight among ourselves or wait to be singled out to do battle in the arena? Josh shouted. The campaigner is our enemy. Let's join forces against him. If we work together we can gain our freedom. Humph! Scoffed Dermok. You have not been here long. You preach rebellion. Many before you have spoken the same words. They are now dead, as you will be soon. You do not yet realize just how helpless our situation truly is. That is right, Petro called out. True, we outnumber the elite guards 30 or 40 to 1, but they have weapons and we have these around our necks. He pointed at the enslavement collars. All a turnkey has to do is touch a button and any revolt is ended. Petro shook his head. It is hopeless. Do not speak to us of rebellion. There is no hope of escaping our fates. We cannot overthrow the campaigner. He is too powerful. There is always hope, Josh argued. Someday we will all return to our homes. Without that dream we might as well give up and die right now. Dermok shook his head. We will never see our homes again. Even if we were to get out of here, there is no way to escape from Galliana. Who will show us the way home? There is the gatekeeper. Hispath the ancient Viperian sage hissed softly. At the mention of the gatekeeper's name, a mysterious hush came over the group. The gatekeeper has the power, and he knows the way. He is the master of the gateways out of Galliana. Who is this gatekeeper? Asked Josh, wondering if there truly was another being in Galliana besides himself capable of manipulating the fold gates that connected the lost land to all other worlds. The gatekeeper is a master of interdimensional travel, explained Dermok. He is a Caravid, added Petro. The Caravids are a greedy, self-serving race. They are not to be trusted. Never. The gatekeeper would sell his only child to the highest bidder. Even if he does have the power to return anyone to his home world, who in Galliana could afford to pay his price? Josh walked up to Hispath. Tell me about the gatekeeper, he implored. Does he really have the power to return people to their home worlds? I do not know, Hispath admitted. It is said that he has sent many back to their homes. But many things are said in Galliana. Still, I one day would like to find out if it is true. Hispath walked away, leaving Joshua Fireseed alone with his thoughts. One thought flashed through his mind over and over as he stood there feeling powerless. I wish I had the light burden and the folding eye right now. Chapter 7. Is the girl ready to battle to the death? The campaigner asked Captain Cree. Will she spill blood for the amusement of my patrons? The crowd must not be disappointed if I match her against a Cyclops or a Centaur. She must kill without reservation. She will do what she is ordered to do, Cree told his supreme commander. Who should we match her against? The campaigner walked across the floor of his private chambers. He halted with his back to Cree. Then he turned. The flesh-eater sentinel we recently captured, the campaigner began. Is he not a member of their death guard? The captain nodded affirmatively. He is, indeed, Kree responded. Put the Earth Girl in the arena against Murik the Death Guard, the campaigner ordered. He chuckled. That will be a match I will enjoy seeing. Kree nodded. He knew the campaigner had just given Allison a death sentence. Even if she fought the best battle of her life, she could not hope to beat a death guard. Kree was unmoved by that thought. All he cared about was following orders. All the campaigner cared about was providing an entertaining and gory show for his customers, while weeding out the weak of the lost land. Where is the girl now? The campaigner asked his second-in-command. I gave her leave to go visit the guard's cantina, Kree said. She's worked hard. She deserves to relax. A relaxed warrior fights better. The campaigner nodded. Find her and bring her to me, he ordered. I want to be sure she will kill or be killed. I must be absolutely positive she shares none of the compassion felt by her older brother. Kree nodded. I will go to the cantina and order her into your presence, the captain said. Then he turned and left the chamber. In the guard's cantina, Allison Fireseed, dressed in her elite guard attire, was seated at the bar. She was sipping a refreshing drink known as elixir. On her right was a fellow guard named Zax. To her left was a guard named Vidal. Zax, like Allison, was humanoid. He stood 6.5 feet tall and was blue-skinned. His body looked like it was made of steel. Vidal was squat. His short legs resembled thick tree stumps. He was 4 feet tall and 3 feet wide. His round, bald head had no ears, just holes on either side of his head. Your first fight in the arena is coming up, Vidal said to Allison. I salute you. He raised his glass and then lowered it. And I pity you. Vidal shook his head. I remember my first battle. I was forced to fight and kill my own brother. Your clone brother, Zax corrected. You still have 28 others. I know, Vidal agreed. But it was like killing myself. He sipped his drink. Your sad tale of woe does not move me, Zax said. I've suffered worse than you. I sit here and drink elixir while my wife and son starve in the fodder pits. It has been 2 years since I've seen them. Perhaps they are dead and I don't even know it. Allison shook her head. She'd grown friendly with Zax and Vidal during the course of her training. Why do you stand for such terrible treatment? She asked. Neither Kree nor the campaigner are invincible. Quiet, Zax said, hushing up Allison. There are guards like us who question the ways of the arena, but many others are rigidly devoted to the warring ways of the campaigner. Like the Perlin dolts, they follow his commands without question. Zax is right, Vidal whispered. Some of us thought that things might change when the old campaigner died, but the new campaigner is even worse. He leaned closer to Allison. Plus, the parasitic insect that covers his body makes him practically invincible. Vidal shook his head. We live better than the fodder, but we are prisoners just as they are. Zax agreed. If there was any chance of a revolt succeeding, we might join in, he lamented. But as Vidal said, we, too, are the campaigners' captives. Talk like that is dangerous, said a voice from behind the trio. Allison, Zax, and Vidal spun around and came face to face with 3 Parhols, muscular aliens with huge ears. They were able to hear whispers 200 yards away. They had no trouble at all hearing the conversation the 3 friends at the bar had just finished. Unfortunately for Allison, Zax, and Vidal, the Parhols belonged to the group that was fiercely loyal to the campaigner. "My friend here resents being compared to a purlin dolt," snarled the first Parhol. "And to tell you the truth, I don't like it much myself." "Oh, Zax, you didn't mean that you loyalists were as dumb as purlin dolts," replied Allison, rising from her seat, along with her two companions. "He meant that compared to you dolts, the purlin are practically geniuses." One thing that could truthfully be said for Allison Fireseed was that she sure knew how to escalate an already tense situation. The first Parhol swung at Allison. She had anticipated the blow and ducked as Zax brought both hands down on top of the second Parhol's head. Vidal charged his short, tank-like body into the third Parhol as Allison kicked the first one in the midsection. Elite guards and guards in training rose from the bar and from all the tables in the cantina. The unwritten code in the guards' cantina was to let a brawl play itself out, with no interference. The second Parhol picked up a bar stool and raised it over his head. Before he could smash it down, Zax boxed both his enormous and incredibly sensitive ears. The Parhol raged in pain, lost his equilibrium, and fell face down onto the bar. Vidal continued to bull his way into the third Parhol, ramming him into the walls and furniture of the cantina. Allison, meanwhile, was in a bit of trouble. The original Parhol instigator had her back pinned to a table and was choking her with both of his powerful hands. Allison resorted to the hand-to-hand combat skills taught to her by Cree and delivered a smash to the Parhol's nose with the palm of her hand. The stunned Parhol released her throat and reeled backward. Allison got up, kicked him in the knees, then smashed him in the back of the neck with her elbow, sending him crashing to the floor. In a few minutes, the fight was over. Allison, Zax, and Vidal uprighted their bar stools and retook their seats. "That was a nice little workout," said Allison, straightening out her uniform. "What happens if those guys tell Cree about our little chat?" "I wouldn't worry too much," replied Vidal, wiping the sweat from his bald head. "Parhols hear so much with those huge ears of theirs that everyone dismisses at least half of what they say as rumors." Just then Cree walked in. Spying the wreckage from the brawl, he laughed. The three guards quickly lifted their glasses. "Your first fight in the arena will live in your memory forever," Zax told Allison. The three guards clinked their glasses together in a toast. "Allison," the captain called, ignoring the others, "come with me. The campaigner wishes to meet with you to discuss your appearance in the arena." Allison Fireseed put her glass down and stood up. "Yes, Captain," she said. She turned and walked off with Cree. Zax turned to Vidal. "I don't like the sound of that," he said. "The campaigner doesn't usually discuss anything." "I don't like the sound of that at all." "I like her," Vidal replied. "I'm glad I don't have to face her in the arena. It would be almost as bad as killing myself again." Zax shook his head and then drained his glass of elixir. Captain Cree showed Allison to the campaigner's private quarters. He left her standing at the closed door and departed. Allison knocked hard on the door. "Come in," the campaigner yelled. Allison opened the door. She entered the room and shut the door behind her. She spied a large wooden chair in the middle of the room. The back of the chair faced her. On the floor near the chair was a huge, ugly insect. It was the bug the campaigner wore over his face, chest, and back for protection. Allison took a deep breath. She realized that the campaigner was more vulnerable now than ever before with his armor off. She might never get another chance like this one. Her hand slowly slid to the hilt of the dagger dangling at her side. "You wanted to see me?" she called out. Slowly the campaigner spun around in his chair. At long last Allison came face to face with the unmasked campaigner. "Why, you're human!" she gasped as her hand dropped from her knife. "You're from Earth just like I am." Allison looked closely at the campaigner. She knew him. They'd met before. "You're the man who was the captain of the guard for the old campaigner," she gulped. "My brother Josh humiliated you after the old campaigner's defeat." "I had forgotten." "I mean, you looked like a human then, but now I mean." The man seated in the chair smiled as Allison struggled for the right words. "Your brother humiliated me, and now I will have my revenge," he answered. "Before you go into the arena for the first time, I wanted to make sure you knew just who you were fighting for." "This is insane," Allison blurted out. "We're both humans. We should be working together." She glanced at the light burden slung over the campaigner's shoulder. "You should be helping me. Together we could find a way back home." Allison's eyes narrowed. Her face hardened. "Cree told me Josh found his way back to Earth." "He lied, didn't he?" The campaigner stood up. His 9-foot frame towered over Allison. "Ryans are born liars," he said. "No, the young Turok did not return to Earth." "Then where is he?" Allison demanded. She pointed at the light burden. "And how did you get that?" "Your brother is in the fodder pit," the campaigner said. Allison shuddered. "He traded the light burden in exchange for his friend's life." The campaigner shook his head in disgust. "He is not a worthy opponent. He is no Turok." "Barry is alive!" Allison exclaimed. Cree lied about everything. Hatred spread across her face. The campaigner smiled. He threw back his head and laughed. "I was going to match you against a death guard in the arena, but now I have a better idea," he stated. "Your opponent in the arena will be none other than Captain Cree himself." He laughed again. "How do you like that? Does that opponent suit you?" "No!" snapped Allison. She shook her head. "No," she repeated. "I hate Cree for what he did, but I don't hate him enough to kill him." She eyed the campaigner. "Why are you like this? Why do you get such a thrill from death?" The campaigner's eyes blazed. "War," he answered. "War made me what I am. I was a prisoner during the United States Civil War on Earth." He pointed an accusing finger at Allison. "I was sent here by Talset, your ancestor, the Turok of that period. Once long ago I, too, dreamed of returning to Earth. But over the years I realized I belonged here. Brutal, barbaric Galliana is my real home. All I know is death, mayhem, and violence. It is who I am." He smiled. "In a way, the Turok Talset helped to create the man who will finally destroy the Turok lineage. Your brother is my captive. And tomorrow you will fight Cree in the arena. I will have my revenge at last." "No," refused Allison. "I will not fight Cree." "Then you will die," the campaigner said. "Either way I have my revenge on the Fireseed family." If only Josh were here, Allison thought. If there was only some way to free him from the pit. "Tomorrow will be a special day," the campaigner vowed. "I will empty the fodder pit to witness my triumph. Your brother, your friend, and the rest of the fodder will be put in the stands. They will see you fight Cree. Your brother will watch as you kill or be killed." He grinned broadly. "And don't even think there's a remote possibility that your brother might help you. He and the rest of the fodder will be closely guarded. And besides," he paused, fingering the light burden. I have this. Your brother, the young Turok, is unarmed and a coward to boot. Something inside Allison snapped. She grabbed her knife and lunged at the campaigner's unprotected face. But the years of combat had honed the campaigner's reflexes into an almost radar-like sixth sense. His powerful hand reached up instinctively and grabbed Allison's wrist. The knife stopped inches from his face. Young fool, he snarled, squeezing so hard, Allison thought she felt the bones in her wrist almost snap. I knew you were going to do that the moment you entered this room. He tossed Allison aside like a scrap of paper. I don't know what Kree saw in you, he sighed. Now leave. Tomorrow you die. The campaigner watched as Allison stormed from his chambers, holding her sore wrist. Once again, as he had done many times since acquiring the satchel, the campaigner opened the light burden and thrust his hand in. Once again, he came out empty-handed. How does he do it? The campaigner raged in frustration. Then he slammed the light burden shut and reached for his insect armor. Back in the fodder pit, Josh rested uneasily against the wall. Barry was sound asleep and snoring loudly. Josh's eyes began to close as well. Before he was fully asleep, he heard it again. It was the voice, calling his name. Soft at first, it got steadily louder. Josh quickly regained his senses. Sleep fled from his brain. The voice became clear. It was a female voice coming from his enslavement collar, the voice of Adon. Turok, said the speaker. I know of your plight. I have been trying to contact you via the computer chip in your collar. Adon? Muttered Josh. Adon! You sold me out. He snapped angrily. You told the campaigner where I was. That's how he captured Barry and Allison. It's your fault we're in the mess we're in. I don't even know where Allison is. Your anger is understandable, but not totally justified, Adon replied. The decision of the Council of Voices was that the welfare of the many was more important than the welfare of the few. I'm sorry for what has happened, but the past cannot be changed. It is the future that concerns me, Adon said. Now that I've discovered the means to communicate with you through the chip in your collar, it is my intention to help free you, as well as your friends and the other prisoners. As Turok, you must lead the prisoners in a revolt against the campaigner. Josh's temper simmered. Now that's a great plan, he said into the collar. How am I supposed to do anything? I don't have the light burden. I traded it to the campaigner to save Barry's life. I don't have any weapons or powers. I'm not Turok anymore. Just ask the campaigner. That's not so, Adon refuted. A Turok's power comes from within his own heart, soul, and mind. The mystic power of the Protector of Earth is carried within you, the power to unite and inspire these captives. You must deliver the message. Josh stood up. Have you forgotten about this collar? He grunted. No, replied Adon. I have finally found a way to use it as a transmitter. I am working on a way to use my own bioelectric signal to open the collars. I will contact you when I have achieved this successfully. It is then you must deliver the message of freedom and lead as a true Turok. Yeah, well, hurry up about it, Josh insisted. Barry snorted, rolled over, and woke up. Who are you talking to, Josh? Barry asked. He looked around. The pit was still and silent. Are you talking to yourself? He asked nervously. That's the first sign of a mental breakdown. Josh shook his head. No, Barry, he replied. I'm not talking to myself. At least I hope I'm not. Chapter 8. Early the following morning, the entrance slab to the fodder pit was raised. Light flooded the dungeon, blinding the captives. Barrow, the guard, stepped up to the opening and stuck his orange head down. Greetings, fodder, he shouted. Today is a special day. Today you will all witness a historic battle in the arena. Barrow waved his arm. Turnkeys rushed forward and placed ladders in the entrance hole. Armed guards scrambled down the ladders into the pits. In addition to blaster weapons and their control devices, the guards carried energy whips. They used the whips to drive the sleepy captives toward the exit tunnel. What's going on? Barry asked Josh. The electric cracking sounds of the energy whips echoed in the dungeon. Josh shrugged his shoulders. It appears we are being taken out into the stands to watch a fight, Hispath replied. It's probably more like an execution. The armed guards moved toward Josh and his friends. A turnkey's whip lashed across Petro's back. He yelped in pain and began to move toward the tunnel. Let's go, Josh said loudly, while the congested mob slowly inched toward the exit tunnel. Whatever it is, at least we're getting out of this rotten pit. Josh and Barry followed along with the group that included Dermok, Petro, and Hispath. While under heavy guard, the puzzled captives were driven through the winding serpentine tunnel that led from the pit up to the battlefield. Then they were herded into a special, well-guarded section of the stands. For many of the captives, it was their first look at the sky and their first breath of fresh air in many years. Fresh air, cried Petro as he sucked oxygen into each of his 3 lungs. Fresh air at last! The sky, remarked Dermok in awe. I'd forgotten how blue it can look. Stop talking and sit down, Barrow shouted as he directed the guards in charge of the crowd. Josh and Barry blinked. Slowly their pupils adjusted to the abundance of sunlight. Josh rubbed his eyes and glanced around. The arena was overflowing with spectators. He saw trappers and hunters seated in what would be the cheaper seats in a ballpark back home. In a section closer to the action were well-dressed dinosides and aliens. They feasted on delicacies as they awaited the start of combat. Then Josh's eyes focused in on the campaigner. He was sitting on his marble throne in his private viewing section. Look there, Hispath said to Josh, pointing down to the arena. Standing in the center of the battleground was a rhinoid warrior. That is Captain Kree, the leader of the elite guard as well as the campaigner's second-in-command, Hispath explained. He has not fought in the arena for years. This must be a special match. Hispath, Josh, and Barry moved into the stands and took their seats near Petro and Dermok in the middle of a massive crowd of fodder. Trumpets sounded. Now we'll see who Captain Kree is fighting, Hispath said. 2 large doors on the opposite side of the battlefield opened. Out into the arena strode Allison, carrying a laser spear and a shield. Guards walked on either side of her. The guards were Zax and Vidal. Josh, stammered Barry, frantically pointing to the battlefield. It's Allison, yelled Josh as he jumped to his feet. Down, shouted Barrow from his guard position behind the fodder. Sit that fodder down, Barrow ordered. 3 burly pig guards pushed their way into the crowded stands. They grappled with Josh for a few moments. Then a turnkey pressed the red button on his control device. A shock from his collar instantly jolted Josh into submission. He collapsed into his seat, too dazed to resist or protest. "Odd on," he muttered as he fell back beside Barry. "Where are you?" "I need your help." Then he passed out. Out in the arena, Zax and Vidal walked to predetermined positions, leaving Allison alone to face her rhinoid foe. Kree was armed with a huge cleaver and an electrified net. The combatants faced each other. "Prepare to die well, Allison," Kree remarked to his opponent. "It is the best you can do." He then turned to salute the campaigner. The campaigner slowly rose from his seat. In his hand was a flag that, when dropped into the arena, would signal the start of the battle. The packed stands buzzed with excitement, the bloodthirsty crowd anxiously awaiting the life-or-death struggle. "Let it begin!" the campaigner cried. The crowd roared. The campaigner released the flag. It floated out of the stands and down toward the battlefield floor. Allison knew that when the flag touched the ground, Kree would begin to fight. She turned away from her enemy and raced toward the falling flag. Before it touched the ground, she impaled it on the tip of her laser spear. "There will be no bloodshed today!" she screamed to the astonished crowd, waving the flag on the tip of her spear above her head. "It is time for these brutal games to be ended once and for all." She turned her spear over and stuck it in the ground, pinning the flag to the soil. "Kill her, Kree!" the campaigner shouted. "Kill the coward! She is just like her miserable brother." Kree raised his razor-sharp cleaver. "I'll cut off her head and toss it into the stands," he shouted. "It will bounce through the crowd like a ball." He raced toward Allison, brandishing his weapon. She calmly turned to face him. There was no place to run. "No!" Zax yelled as he broke from his guard position. "The girl is right. The games must end. If it's blood the campaigner wants, let's give it to him." Zax threw his laser spear. Whoosh! The point struck Captain Kree in the chest and sank deep into his body. Kree dropped his shield and cleaver. He grabbed the spear's shaft with his two hands and staggered forward. He opened his mouth to speak, but couldn't. He fell forward, blood pouring from his open mouth, and landed at Allison's feet. Allison knelt down near her fallen enemy. "I'm sorry, Kree," she whispered to her dying foe. "I'm sorry it had to end this way. Seize the traitor Zax," the enraged campaigner shouted. "And send in Murik the Death Guard to finish what Kree started." Several Cyclops guards rushed at Zax. A door opened, and Murik the Flesh-Eater Sentinel sprang into the arena with his arm blades glistening in the sun. "The girl is mine," Murik shouted. "No," Vidal countered. "It is you who are mine." Vidal jumped in front of Murik. The Death Guard slashed at Vidal's face, but he blocked the blow with his shield. Vidal held his long, curved sword in a ready position as he whirled on his heels. For a being of his girth, he was lightning fast. His sword lashed out in a circular motion. Thwack! It was Murik's hideous head that sailed into the stands as a grisly souvenir for a bloodthirsty fan. "Down with the campaigner!" Vidal shouted. "It is not kill or be killed today," Zax cried as he battled with the guards sent to capture him. "Today it is fight to live!" "Yes!" yelled another guard who joined with Zax in his fight against the Cyclops. "Fight to live!" Soon the chant of "Fight to live!" could be heard ringing out in all corners of the arena. Guards loyal to the campaigner engaged in fierce combat with members of the elite guard tired of their master's barbaric ways. Zax and Vidal carved bloody paths to Allison's side. "Thank you," Allison said to her friends. Without help, our rebellion will be over all too quickly, Sax sadly admitted. In the area of the stands where the fodder sat, unrest was beginning to spread amongst the prisoners. It is a revolt! Dermot cried. Down with the campaigner! A touch of a turnkey's finger to his control device shocked Dermot back into his seat. Fight to live! Petro shouted, picking up the chant of the rebellious guards who were now battling for their lives against overwhelming odds. He, too, was shocked severely. The spectators who had come simply to be entertained sat back and enjoyed the carnage and mayhem. This show was different from previous arena battles, but to them it was still just a show. Wake up, Josh! Barry implored as he shook the limp body of his unconscious friend. Wake up. There are 2 outs in the bottom of the 9th, and we're losing. We need you to come to bat for our side or the game is over and we lose everything. Chapter 9. Joshua Fireseed's eyelids began to blink rapidly. Thank goodness, Barry cried in great relief. All around Barry and Josh, discontented fodder were rising in protest only to be shocked back into submission by their guards. Josh sat up. As he did, Audon's voice boomed clearly from his enslavement collar. The time has come for you to take charge and lead, Audon said to Josh. I have finally calculated the precise way to channel my bioelectric energy through your collar. Freedom is at hand, Turok. And you will be its instrument. Audon's voice trailed off. Josh's collar began to glow. Barry gasped as he watched in shock. There was a loud pop, and the enslavement collar around Josh's neck snapped apart and fell off. You're free! Barry shouted. Your collar broke. Hispath got to his feet. This man is the Turok. He yelled to the crowd of fodder. His power is strong. He snapped his collar without weapon or talisman. The crowd looked on in astonishment as Josh got to his feet. The time to fight is at hand! Josh yelled. Fight to live! He looked at Barry. Barry's collar began to glow. So did Hispath's collar. Pop! Pop! The 2 collars sprang open and fell off. Free! Cried Hispath. I'm free! The Turok did it. The Turok has come to lead us from this place. Petro's collar glowed and came apart, as well. Dermot's collar glowed and split. Fight! Urged Petro. Follow the Turok! Down with the campaigner! Dermot screamed. Pop! 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 Everywhere throughout the stands enslavement collars glowed and then snapped open. The fodder were freed from their chains of electronic bondage. Like a great tidal wave, they rose up against their oppressors. Follow me! Josh yelled as he led the prisoners against the guards in the stands. Josh pushed forward until he came face to face with Barrow, who was armed with a light spear. The 2 warriors faced off as fights broke out all around them. You'll never live long enough to see your friends executed, Barrow vowed. You'll die even before this puny rebellion is put down. Barrow thrusted his weapon toward Josh. The young Turok sidestepped the thrust, but the searing laser point singed Josh's side. He lunged forward and hit Barrow square in the face. His first punch shattered Barrow's nose and rocked the Cyclops' head backward. Feeling power rise within him, Josh hit Barrow with a left jab and a crunching right cross. The Cyclops fell to the floor of the arena stands. Forward, Josh urged the crowd. The mob moved ahead, trampling Barrow beneath their feet, snapping his bones and spine. In the topmost sector of the stands, Dermot and Petro came face to face with a pig turnkey. When the turnkey was confronted by his former prisoners, he reached instinctively for the control device on his belt. His finger found the red button, and he frantically pressed it. Nothing happened. Petro looked at Dermot and grinned. Dermot laughed out loud. The turnkey pressed the button again and again. "The dumb swine doesn't realize we're not wearing collars anymore," Dermot said to Petro. Petro stepped closer to the turnkey, who stepped back in fear, moving to the edge of the stadium wall. His heels touched the edge. There was no place else to go. "This class on prisoner cruelty is over," Petro said to the turnkey. "It's time for you to drop out." Petro socked the turnkey in his piggish snout, sending him plummeting over the edge of the wall. He fell out of sight. "Let's go, Petro," urged Dermot. "The fight is spreading through the arena." Turok is leading the rebellion toward the campaigner's private box. From his personal viewing stand, the campaigner watched in shock as the tide of battle quickly turned against him. He knew he had only minutes before the angry mob reached his throne. The campaigner ran forward and vaulted down into the middle of the battlefield. He fell to the ground, then scrambled to his feet. He looked up and spotted his intended target, Allison. She stood in the middle of the arena, fighting alongside Zax and Vidal. All around her the battles raged on. The campaigner raced forward. Vidal saw him coming and sprang to Allison's defense. He jumped toward the campaigner, who reached back and landed a savage blow on Vidal's chin. The unconscious Vidal crumpled to the ground. Next, Zax tried to stop the campaigner's advance. The brutal battlemaster kicked out with his right foot. The blow hit Zax in the midsection. He doubled over. A vicious chop on the back of Zax's neck rendered him unconscious. He collapsed into a limp heap. "Now it's you and I," the campaigner said menacingly to Allison, drawing his dagger. Allison backed away from the brute. She knew her own dagger would be useless against the campaigner while he was wearing his invincible bug armor. Slowly she backed up, step by step, keeping her eyes on her deadly foe. "You're wrong, campaigner," she corrected, pointing across the arena. Josh was leading a group of freed fodder toward them. "It's not just us. My brother is coming. I told you he'd come. The Turok is your opponent now. And he's gonna kick your bug-sucking butt. First," growled the sinister campaigner, "I will dispatch his little sister." The campaigner raised his dagger above his head, preparing to plunge it into Allison. He stepped forward and jerked his arm downward with all of his might toward her heart. To the campaigner's utter shock, Allison reached up with both hands and grabbed him by the forearm. Sidestepping and using her opponent's weight against him, she twisted the campaigner's wrist, whirled on her heels, and sent him sailing in the air over her shoulder. He landed hard on his back but quickly turned to face her. "Cree taught me well," Allison jeered. She beckoned with her fingers, urging the campaigner to try again. "If you want another shot at me before my brother and his friends get here, you'd better make it fast." The campaigner snarled like a savage beast as he sprang to his feet and slashed at Allison with his knife. She escaped the blade by inches. The campaigner assumed an attack position with the dagger out in front of his body. Allison faked a move to her left. When the campaigner stepped to counter, she kicked out with her right foot, knocking the dagger from his hand. "You run an excellent combat school, campaigner," Allison said. "Correction. You ran a good combat school. I'd say school is just about out." The enraged campaigner leaped into the air. He tried to clasp his outstretched hands around Allison's delicate throat. He wanted to squeeze the breath out of her with every fiber of his twisted being. But instead of meeting his charge face to face, Allison rolled back out of the way and dropped to the ground. The campaigner hurled over her. As he flew past, Allison reached up and grabbed Turok's light burden, yanking the campaigner's right shoulder. She grasped the fringed satchel tightly and turned to face her adversary just as her brother arrived on the scene. The campaigner landed on his hands and knees in the dirt. "Are you okay, Ollie?" Josh asked, grasping her shoulders and squeezing tightly. He was thrilled to see that she was alive, and apparently holding her own quite well against the campaigner. Behind Josh ran Barry and hundreds of freed captives. "I'm fine, big bro," Allison replied. "Long time, no see. By the way, did you lose something?" She held out the light burden. "Sort of," Josh said sheepishly. "It's a long story. But thanks." He took the light burden and slipped it over his shoulder just as the campaigner got to his feet. Josh raised his arms into the air. "Stop the fighting!" he shouted. His voice boomed through the arena and echoed through the stands. Too many have already died to satisfy his bloodthirsty whims. Slowly, the individual battles in and around the arena ceased. The fighting was over. The captives had won their freedom. Near Allison and Josh, Zax and Vidal recovered and got to their feet. They faced their former taskmaster. "There will never be peace until the campaigner admits defeat," Zax said. "Zax is right," Vidal agreed. "If he declares to everyone here that he has lost, the battle is truly ended." "Well," Josh shouted to the campaigner. "What do you say?" "I will never admit complete defeat until you have bested me personally." The campaigner paused. "And it must be a fight to the finish." Campaigner versus Turok. Just like old times. All eyes trained on Joshua Fireseed. Would he fight? Josh remembered the words Adon had spoken to him while he was locked in the pit. The safety and welfare of many was more important than the safety and welfare of a few. Or just one. Josh looked at Barry. "Fight him," Barry said softly. He turned to Hispath. "You are the Turok," Hispath said. "You can do it, Josh," Allison said. "I have faith in you." "Fight, Turok," Petro called out from somewhere in the crowd. "You are our leader now," Zax said to Josh. "My wife and children may be somewhere among the freed fodder. I can't search for them until I know our battle against the campaigner is truly over." "Well, Turok," chided the campaigner. "What is your decision?" "We will fight," Josh called out without a trace of fear in his voice. "It's your funeral, campaigner." A loud cheer arose. Then a shudder went down Josh's spine. In a way, the campaigner was getting what he'd wanted all along. Josh and he were going to do battle before a crowd of eager onlookers. Chapter 10. Turok prepared to do battle. He donned his mystic breastplate, leggings, and the bandana with the folding eye. Then he faced the campaigner as crowds of anxious spectators backed away to form a circle around them. Josh positioned himself to reach into the light burden. "The light burden provides you with an unfair advantage, Turok," the campaigner complained. "You have an arsenal of weapons at your fingertips." The handful of remaining supporters of the campaigner grumbled in agreement. "That didn't stop your predecessor from fighting me," replied Josh. and losing. Hey! Barry called out. Josh is no cheat. Let the campaigner name his weapon of choice. He'll beat you anyway. Allison slid up beside Barry and poked him sharply in the ribs with her elbow. Can't you keep your big mouth shut? She asked angrily. The blonde-headed father has made a good point, the campaigner called out. I choose sabers. Call it a sentimental choice from my Civil War days. No, shouted Zax. The campaigner is an expert swordsman. Young Turok would be no match for him. I said I choose sabers, the campaigner repeated. Fight or be declared the loser, he said to Josh. Sabers it is, Josh agreed, handing the light burden to Allison. Vidal moved to the arena's lower-level arsenal to collect the weapons. Will a saber cut through that bug armor? Allison asked Zax. If the campaigner is weakened, it may, her friend replied. The armor is, after all, a living creature that is greatly affected by the physical condition of its host. Suddenly, Vidal came racing out of the tunnel that led down to the arsenal. In his hand were two gleaming sabers. What's wrong with Vidal? Zax asked. He moves like his backside is on fire. Something is on fire, Barry shouted. Look. He pointed at the tunnel exit. A funnel of thick black smoke was seeping out and twisting its way skyward. Prisoners have set fire to the main computer room and to the arsenal, Vidal cried in alarm. We don't have much time. He stopped near the two combatants and dropped the sabers at their feet. His chest heaved as he gasped to regain his breath. With the weapons and explosives stored down there, the entire arena could be blown to pieces at any time. A collective shriek of terror rose from the crowd. Look at that! Dermok shouted, gesturing toward the tunnel. A large tongue of fire licked up the arena walls. There, too, Hispath hissed, pointing at another exit. A ball of fire rolled out of the arena. Screams, cries, and shouts of alarm filled the air as the crowd began to panic. We've got to get out of here right now, Petro called to the crowd. I know a secret escape route, Zax shouted. Everyone follow me! Zax ran off with the hysterical crowd following as the fire spread. The ground began to shake, and a low, frightening rumble came from deep within the bowels of the stadium. Let's go, Barry said to Allison and Josh. This is over. All of the others were already fleeing to safer ground. No, refused the campaigner. He reached down and snatched up the saber. The campaigner kicked the other sword toward Josh. Defend yourself, Turok, he ordered. Josh picked up the saber and shifted the weapon back and forth, from hand to hand, getting a feel for its weight and balance. At that instant, a small explosion shook the entire stadium. Stone walls on the arena cracked and crumbled. The air was filled with more cries and screams from the escaping crowd as fodder and their former guards funneled through the exit to the outside world. Allison and Barry wobbled and struggled to keep their footing. The ground was shaking as fissures split apart the land beneath them. Come on, Josh, Allison begged. Let the campaigner stay if he wants to. But we should go. Otherwise we're all gonna die. The entire arena is crumbling around us. The campaigner growled like a mad beast, lurching forward with his saber raised. He swung his finely honed sword at Josh's head. Josh got the blade of his weapon up just in time to block the attack, metal clanging against metal. Go! He yelled to Allison and Barry. Run! I'll follow. But I have to finish this here and now. The campaigner pulled back his saber, and once again savagely hacked at his foe. Josh again managed to block the blow. Huge blocks of stone were now falling everywhere. Smoke bellowed skyward as walls of flame shot up from the lower regions and began to consume the training complex and the arena battlefield. "I won't leave," Allison argued. "We have to," Barry told her. He grabbed her arm and pulled hard. "Josh knows what he's doing. Come on." Reluctantly, Allison gave in. Slowly she broke into a trot behind Barry. They raced for the exit, following Zax and the others. Allison and Barry disappeared in the clouds of thick gray smoke. The campaigner lowered his saber and halted his attack for an instant. "Now, Turok," he grunted. "We're alone. No one will see me kill you." "Why must one of us die?" Josh said. "Don't you understand? It's over, campaigner." "It's not over until the last drop of blood is spilled, Turok," the campaigner called. "And that blood will be yours." He resumed his wild attack, striking blow after powerful blow, which Josh blocked with increasing difficulty. The Turok line has been a constant thorn in the side of campaigners throughout history. Your ancestor Talset made me what I am today. Now I intend to exact my revenge on you. The gleaming silver blade of his saber slashed down at Josh's neck. Josh had his blade up shoulder high to block it just in time. Sparks flew as the blades clashed against each other. Josh slashed at the campaigner, driving him back. "Don't be a fool," Josh grunted, the exhaustion of his long ordeal starting to take its toll. "Don't mistake compassion and reason for weakness and cowardice. You'll find out like others did before you that killing a Turok is easier said than done." Josh slashed hard with his blade. The campaigner managed to block the mighty blow, but it drove him to his knees. The battlemaster lashed back at his younger foe, gaining enough of an advantage to regain his footing. The fierce battle raged on as the fire around them spread. The rumble beneath their feet increased to a deafening din. The ground shook with such intensity that the combatants struggled to retain their balance. All around them the arena was breaking apart. The campaigners' battle complex was systematically being reduced to charred piles of burning rubble. "We're running out of time, campaigner," Josh called at a break in the battle, when both men paused to catch their breath. "The world you knew is crumbling all around you. The day of the gladiator is over. Lay down your weapon, and let's get out of here before we're both buried alive." "What better place for a campaigner to perish than in his own arena?" the campaigner stated calmly. "I've seen thousands lose their lives here. What difference will 2 more lost lives make?" The intensity and ferocity of the campaigners' renewed attack increased. The blades of the 2 mighty warriors clashed again and again, clanging amid the smoke and rubble. Kaboom! A sudden massive explosion caused the ground to tremble so violently that Josh lost his balance. Slipping to one knee, he momentarily dropped his guard. The campaigner saw the opening and immediately took advantage of it. He lunged. The razor-sharp point of the campaigner's saber sliced through the flesh of Josh's left shoulder, opening a gash. Blood seeped out. Josh snarled angrily. "You'll have to do better than that, campaigner." The searing pain in his shoulder, and the sight of his own blood enraged Turok. He fought back with the mad savagery of a cornered grizzly bear. He beat the campaigner back. Seeing an opening, Josh slashed a cut across the bug armor that protected the campaigner's chest. To his surprise, the saber blade sliced through the insect's shell like a red-hot knife through butter. As its host grew weaker, so had the formerly invulnerable insect. Blood and internal organs gushed out of the bug's gaping wound. The mortally injured insect released its parasitic grasp on the campaigner and slowly peeled away from his chest, back and face. Pieces of the dead bug fell to the ground, twitching as its life fluids poured out. Then it became still and died at its host's feet. For the first time, Josh got a look at the face of the man behind the bug mask. Seeing the face of the man he had just humiliated after defeating the previous campaigner brought a flood of thoughts to Josh's mind, and a single question to his lips. "Did you capture my sister and friend to lure me here just to satisfy your personal need for revenge?" Josh said, scowling in contempt. "What kind of man are you?" He angrily gritted his teeth. "All this because I embarrassed you once?" "No, Turok," the unmasked campaigner disagreed. "This wasn't about revenge." The campaigner jabbed at Josh with his sword. Josh turned the thrust aside. The campaigner pulled back and spoke again. "You disrespected our strict warrior code. You have challenged the very integrity of our gladiatorial games and showed contempt for a fighting tradition thousands of years old." He glared at the young Saquon warrior before him. "Who are you to judge our ancient ways, to question our traditions? To say how another should live or die? Tell me, young whelp. Who are you?" "I am Turok," Josh replied without a moment's hesitation. "I am protector of Earth. And I'm a pretty darn good baseball player, too." Josh threw in that last part for himself. The campaigner grunted and closed in on his foe. He unleashed a fury of blows, slashes, and thrusts. Josh was hard-pressed to turn them aside, but miraculously he managed to avoid more injury. The two men were now very near total exhaustion. Their prolonged battle had drained every drop of their energy and severely sapped their reserves of strength. Both warriors were forced to pause in order to catch their breath. Josh's shoulder wound throbbed in agony. "You're wrong," Josh puffed. "What you have here isn't a warrior code or a fighting tradition. It's enslavement of the most horrible kind. There's no honor in this." He waved his arms toward the crumbling and burning arena. "Kill or be killed aren't the words of a true warrior." "Fight to live, campaigner," urged Josh. "Fight for justice and freedom. You're from Earth. Don't you have a single drop of humanity left in you? Did that parasitic bug you wore drain every drop of human compassion from your veins?" "I may be human, but I lost my humanity long ago," the campaigner confessed. "As a prisoner of war, I was forced to steal scraps bread from dying men in order to survive myself. When I came to Galliana many years ago, I quickly learned that the credo of the Lost Land is survival of the fittest. It is all I have ever known. It is who I am." K-blam. Boom. Kaboom. A series of powerful explosions ravaged what little was left of the campaigners' crumbling arena. The ground ripped apart, and seams cracked open all around the two foes. Smoke, fire, and toxic gases belched forth out of the fissures. The foul air burned Josh's nostrils and chest as he sucked it into his lungs. Josh looked toward the route the others had used to escape from the raging inferno. He saw that their only path to freedom was about to come tumbling down. "We're out of time," he said to the campaigner. Josh tossed aside his weapon. "Come with me. I'll help you regain your humanity. I'm going back to Earth. I'll take you with me." Josh bravely stretched out his unarmed hand to the campaigner in a clear demonstration of peace. The campaigner raised his saber to cut off Josh's hand at the wrist. Josh could have pulled his hand back, but he didn't. Courageously, he kept it stretched out. The campaigner started to cut downward and then stopped the blade in mid-descent before it touched Josh's flesh. The steadfast bravery of the young man made the campaigner experience pangs of emotion he hadn't felt in decades. He pulled the blade back and stared at the gleaming silver weapon. For a second he stood frozen in thought as the only world he knew exploded around him. The campaigner tossed his saber into a steaming crack in the ground behind him. "Go, Joshua Fireseed!" he commanded. "I order you to go. Save yourself. I belong here. This place is part of me, and I am part of it. If it is doomed, then I will perish, too." He faced Josh. "Go!" he bellowed. "The campaigner orders you from his arena." He pointed toward the burning exit. Josh solemnly withdrew his hand and nodded. He turned toward the escape path as the burning walls of the arena finally collapsed. The last exit was buried beneath tons of smoldering rocks and splintered wood. There was no chance of leaving the arena now. Josh was trapped. There was only one way out of the raging inferno. Josh reached up and lowered the folding eye. He peered through the mystical lens, desperately searching for a spatial portal large enough for him to fit through. The sound of the rumbling below him increased. The shaking also intensified. There were only seconds left before the center of the arena would be blasted to bits. Josh spied a fold gate opening near the fissure the campaigner had tossed his weapon into. The portal was only the size of a laundry chute. It would be a tight squeeze. But Josh had no choice. He ran toward it. "Farewell, campaigner," he called as he leaped headfirst into the portal and slid into the hazy netherscape. Before he exited the flaming arena, he heard the destructive explosion that reduced the campaigner's home base to a huge, charred crater of smoking rubble. His last glimpse of the battle complex was of the campaigner standing perfectly still, resigned to his fate. Josh saw a flash as a rolling wave of fire swept over the earthling who'd fought his way to a throne as a gladiator in a hostile lost land. The campaigner, the ruler of the brutal arena, died as he had lived, violently. He faced his demise willingly. The campaigner perished without uttering a single word of regret or a cry of fear. Chapter 11. Joshua Fireseed catapulted himself into the mysterious realm of the interdimensional netherscape. Once again, he was unable to control his direction or destination. He bounced from portal to portal, finding numerous exits closed to him. "This is nuts," he thought. "I'm not trying to find my way back to Earth or anything. I just want to get to a fold gate outside the arena. I've made short journeys like that hundreds of times since I started doing this." The pain in Josh's injured shoulder gave him a clue to his problem. "Between the loss of blood and total exhaustion, I don't even have enough control to pick a fold gate 100 yards from where I started," he thought. Josh tumbled from fold gate opening to fold gate opening without being able to fully enter any one portal. He'd escaped death on Galliana only to find himself once again trapped in the confusing maze of connections between dimensions. TUROK found himself going through the fold gates up to a certain point before being violently yanked back into the netherscape, as full passage was denied to him. In one instance, Josh's head poked through a portal in the sky above an alien world. His head stuck out up to his neck, and he peered down at a group of alien children far below. The children had blue skin and 4 arms each. They were wearing strange uniforms and playing a game on a field. Josh couldn't believe his eyes. The field looked like a baseball diamond, and the game appeared to be a version of the game he loved and excelled at. He was amazed. Josh saw a blue-skinned alien wind up and pitch a large ball to an opposing batter. Before the batter could swing, one of the alien outfielders spotted Josh's face protruding out of the sky. "Oh, look!" cried the alien. A monster! The other fielders glanced up. One by one they pointed at Josh and hollered. The game was completely disrupted. What happened next, Josh never got the chance to see. He was sucked back into the netherscape and pinballed toward another portal. The young Saquon warrior careened off one fold gate opening and bounced toward another like a living ping-pong ball. He hit the opening and was given a startling look at a brutal, primitive world somewhere in another time and dimension. Josh saw a winged tiger the size of an elephant soar out of the sky. The tiger had long, saber-like fangs. Its gleaming claws flashed as it dove toward the back of a giant longhorn bull. The bull was as large as a whale and as yellow as the full moon. The bull was peacefully grazing in a field of purple grass. It didn't know its life was in grave danger. "Look out!" Josh screamed, hoping to warn the bull and give it a fighting chance for survival. His warning cry was never heard. The tiger landed on the bull's back and stuck its claws into the creature's back. Its fangs sank deep into the animal's neck. Blood gushed from the puncture wounds. The bull bellowed in anguish. The tiger withdrew his teeth and flapped its wings, lifting its mortally wounded prey high into the air. Again Josh was pulled back from a portal. His glimpse at another world quickly closed as he was ripped away from the fold gate opening by some invisible force he could not understand or control. The young Turok was repelled from the portal and drawn toward another. The sights he glimpsed at the threshold of the next portal were the most disturbing of all. "It's Earth!" Josh cried, instantly recognizing his home planet. "But it's Earth many years ago. I'm seeing the past come to life." Josh's view was of a battlefield in Europe. He saw French forces under the guidance of Napoleon Bonaparte were charging to engage English soldiers in battle. Rows of cannons were firing. Men were shooting. Units of cavalry were thundering forward on horseback. "It's Waterloo," Josh gasped as he once again bounced away from his viewing portal. Josh focused his concentration, summoning all his remaining strength. Putting the pain in his shoulder aside, he felt a small degree of control return to him. Then he steered toward a large portal that didn't spit him back out into the netherscape. He flew through the passage like he was slipping down a great water slide, shot out of the fold gate opening, and came crashing down in some bushes in the lost land of Galliana, not far from the smoldering ruins of the campaigners' arena. "I told you he'd find a way to get out of that death trap," Barry shouted, breaking into a run toward the spot where Josh had crash-landed. "Josh!" yelled Allison, racing toward her brother. "Are you okay?" Josh struggled to get to his feet. "Your arm," said Allison as she checked out his wound. "How did that happen?" "It's just a nick," Josh replied. "A gift from the campaigner." Barry started to anxiously glance around. "The campaigner?" He sputtered. "He didn't escape, did he?" Joshua slowly shook his head. "He went down with his sinking ship like a sea captain," the Saquon warrior said. "He died in that last big explosion." Allison inhaled deeply. "I know he was a brutal, bloodthirsty adversary, but he was also a human just like us. I can't help feeling a little sorry for him." "Humph!" Barry grunted. "Well, I don't. He was the most inhumane human I've ever met. He tried to kill Josh. He forced me to fight a centaur. He tried to make you fight to the death in the arena," he told Allison. "Human? That guy was about as human as Attila the Hun. And he didn't have half of Attila's charming personality." "I could be wrong," said Josh, "but I think in the end he regained just a tiny bit of his lost humanity." He died the death of a campaigner and expressed no regrets. But he spared me when he had the chance to take his petty revenge. I thought that was pretty human of him. I find that hard to believe, young Turok, Hispath said as he walked up to join the group. Petro, Dermok, and Vidal were also with Hispath, as were Barry, Allison, and few other former captives. A campaigner feels no emotion. He died as he lived, in brutal fashion. This world is well rid of him. Where are the others? Josh asked, ready to change the subject and think about their next step. What happened to the freed captives and the guards who supported our struggle for freedom? Most have already gone, Turok, Dermok answered. They departed hours ago, each going his separate way. Some decided to make for the safe lands, said Vidal. Sax chose to lead them. They have an excellent chance of making it there under his leadership. Sax? Josh said. He's the guard who helped Allison in the arena, Barry explained. He took care of Cree, the campaigner's captain. And this is my friend Vidal, Allison said, introducing Josh. He defeated the Sentinel Death Guard. Vidal and Josh shook hands. Josh thanked Vidal for intervening on behalf of his sister. In a way, Vidal replied, we all fought for ourselves. I guess that's what a rebellion is about. Individuals battle for personal reasons that benefit the common good. Take Sax, for instance. He fought for his family and luckily found them alive after the battle. He was reunited with his wife and children. Now he's leading them and others to the safe lands. Josh scratched his head. Did you say the others left hours ago? He questioned. Barry nodded. Yes, why? I guess I was trapped in the Netherscape longer than I'd realized. Allison put her arms around her big brother and hugged him. I'm glad to have you back, she said. Josh returned the hug. I'm glad to be here, he admitted. Every trip to the Netherscape is a little scarier than the one before it. He sighed and looked his sister in the eye. But I'll keep trying to get us back to Earth. I know practice makes perfect. Allison gently touched her brother's arm. She smiled. That may not be necessary anymore, she said. Huh? Sputtered Josh. What do you mean? We may have found a new way to get home, Barry said. He turned and looked at Hispath, Petro, and the others. Barry is correct, Hispath confirmed. In your absence, we have put our minds together to discuss the possible routes of escape from Galliana. What have you come up with? Josh wanted to know. The gatekeeper, Petro blurted out. Dermok rapidly nodded his head. Yes. The gatekeeper, he stated. The gatekeeper is our only hope of escape. He is a ruthless, cunning caravid. He is not to be trusted, but he is also known to navigate the portals between worlds. That is why we have remained here with Barry and Allison, Vidal added. It is our intention to go to the gatekeeper for passage to our home worlds. Josh turned to Hispath. How do we find him? He asked. Hispath's long, forked tongue shot out of his serpent's mouth and curled up before rolling back in. Vidal knows the way, Hispath stated. He shifted his gaze to Vidal. Josh looked at the former member of the elite guard. I've seen him, Vidal said. Once during a raid for fodder with the old campaigner, I came across the alien harbor master. It was near the vast water barrier where his terminal is located. Josh couldn't believe his ears. This is good news, he announced as he slapped Vidal on his wide back. For all of us. Indeed it is, agreed the Viperin sage Hispath. Will you help lead our group safely to the gatekeeper's terminal, young Turok? Of course he will, Allison spoke up, answering for her brother. It's either lead us or practice in the Netherscape. She turned and winked at Josh. And he hates to practice anything, except baseball. Josh laughed. I'll lead, he said. Any chance to get home without working at it? That sounds good to me, Barry chimed in. I don't know how much longer I can last here without pizza or video games. Josh and Video Leap led the others away from the smoking wreckage of what once was the campaigners' arena, without so much as a single glance back. End of Turok. Book 3. Arena of Doom. By Michael Teitelbaum.